The text message glared at me from my phone screen, each word like a punch to the gut. He proposed. I said yes. Call me ASAP. I'm Melanie, and my best friend Lucy just got engaged to the man who shattered my heart 2 years ago. My hands trembled as I hit the call button. 1 ring, 2 rings. Lucy's excited voice burst through the speaker before the third. Mel, oh my God, can you believe it? Jake asked me last night at Marina Point. It was so romantic. Marina Point, the same spot where he'd broken up with me, claiming he wasn't ready for commitment. I forced enthusiasm into my voice. That's amazing, Lucy. I'm so happy for you. You have to be my maid of honor. Please say yes. The room started spinning. Are you sure? What about Emma? My sister? Lucy scoffed. She's barely speaking to the family these days. Besides, you're my person, Mel. Always have been. I closed my eyes, remembering the night Jake left. How Lucy had shown up at my apartment with ice cream and wine, holding me while I cried. She didn't know then that Jake was the reason. I'd never told her. Of course I'll be your maid of honor, I heard myself say. Perfect. Brunch tomorrow? I'll tell you everything. The next morning, I found Lucy already seated at our usual cafe, wedding magazines spread across the table. She jumped up to hug me, her engagement ring catching the sunlight. I know what you're thinking, she said as we sat down. It's fast, right? 6 months together and boom, engaged. I stirred my coffee slowly. Have you told Emma yet? I tried calling, went straight to voicemail. Lucy's smile faltered. She's been so distant lately. I don't understand what happened between us. The waitress arrived with our orders. I picked at my avocado toast, my appetite gone. Lucy, about Jake. Oh, speaking of Jake, he's meeting us here. He's dying to see you. My fork clattered against the plate. He's what? Surprise! A familiar voice called out. Jake stood there, looking exactly as I remembered. Tall, perfectly styled dark hair, that disarming smile that had once made my knees weak. Melanie, he said smoothly, sliding into the seat next to Lucy. It's been too long. Our eyes met. There was a warning in his, a silent plea to keep our past buried. Jake, I managed. Congratulations. He wrapped an arm around Lucy, who beamed at him adoringly. Thanks. You know, I always knew you two would hit it off. Remember how we used to all hang out together? My coffee turned bitter in my mouth. We'd never hung out together. He'd always made excuses when Lucy was around. So the wedding's in 3 months, Lucy announced. Small ceremony, just family and close friends. Jake's idea. Isn't he thoughtful? 3 months. Of course he wanted it rushed. Before anyone could dig too deep, ask too many questions. That's soon, I said carefully. When you know, you know, Jake replied, kissing Lucy's cheek. She giggled and my stomach churned. My phone buzzed. A text from Veronica. Did you hear about Lucy and Jake? The Jake? Call me. Everything okay? Lucy asked. I stood up abruptly. Sorry, work emergency. I need to go. But we haven't even started planning. Lucy's face fell. We'll do dinner this week, I promise. I hugged her quickly, avoiding Jake's gaze. Outside, I fumbled with my phone, dialing Veronica. Finally, she answered. Please tell me you're going to stop this train wreck. I don't know what to do, I whispered, walking faster. She's so happy. Happy because she doesn't know the truth. You have to tell her. And destroy her? Break her heart? She's my best friend, V. Better her heart breaks now than after they're married. You know what he's capable of. I did know. The lies, the manipulation, the other women, the money he'd borrowed and never returned, the promises he'd broken. Give me time to think, I said. I need to figure out the right way to handle this. Don't wait too long, Veronica warned. 3 months isn't much time. I ended the call and leaned against a building, trying to steady my breathing. A notification popped up, a text from Jake. We should talk. Meet me at the Grove tonight, 8 p.m. My finger hovered over the delete button. Instead, I typed, nothing to talk about. His response was immediate. There's plenty to talk about. Don't make me the bad guy here, Mel. I thought of Lucy's radiant smile, of all the times she'd been there for me, of the truth that could destroy everything. Fine, I replied. 8 p.m. The pieces were already in motion. I just hoped I was strong enough for what came next. Lucy's bridal shower was exactly what you'd expect. Pink balloons, champagne flowing, and excited chatter filling her mother's backyard. I stood near the gift table, arranging presents and trying not to think about my meeting with Jake last night. "Just stay out of it, Melanie," he'd said at the Grove, his voice low and threatening. "What Lucy doesn't know won't hurt her." A burst of laughter pulled me back to the present. Lucy was opening gifts, surrounded by friends and family. Her sister Emma sat slightly apart from the group, typing on her phone. "Look what Emma got me." Lucy held up a delicate silver bracelet. "It's beautiful." Emma barely glanced up. Jake helped me pick it out. The champagne turned sour in my stomach. Why was Jake helping Emma shop for gifts? Veronica appeared beside me, nodding toward Emma. "Is it just me, or is she acting weird?" "When isn't she?" I muttered, but something felt off. Emma kept checking her phone, smiling at messages. Lucy's mother clinked her glass. "Time for the wedding video. Everyone gather round." We crowded around a makeshift screen. Lucy and Jake's engagement photos flashed by, set to romantic music. Happy couple at the beach, kissing at sunset, dancing at a party. "Wait," Veronica whispered. "Isn't that the charity gala from last month? The one Lucy couldn't attend because of work?" I squinted at the image. Jake in a tux, dancing with someone in a red dress. The camera angle was odd, only showing their backs. Emma suddenly stood up. "I need some air." I followed her to the kitchen, finding her gripping the counter, knuckles white. "Everything okay?" I asked. She jumped. "Fine, just hot outside." "That was you, wasn't it? In the red dress?" Emma's face drained of color. "I don't know what you're talking about." "At the gala, dancing with Jake." "Keep your voice down." She glanced toward the backyard. "It wasn't what you think." "Then what was it?" Before she could answer, Lucy bounced in. "There you are. Emma, come help me with the games." Emma plastered on a smile and followed her sister. I stayed behind, hands shaking as I poured more champagne. "You saw it too, right?" Veronica appeared next to me. "The dance photo? Yeah, but there's more." I told her about Emma's reaction. Holy shit. Veronica grabbed my arm. "Look." Through the kitchen window, we watched Jake arrive, supposedly to pick up Lucy later. He headed straight for Emma, whispering something that made her step back. Lucy was occupied with guests, oblivious to the tension. "We need proof," I said. "Real proof." "I might know someone," Veronica replied. "A private investigator. He's good at digging up dirt." "That's extreme." "More extreme than letting your best friend marry a cheating bastard?" The afternoon dragged on. I watched Jake work the crowd, charming Lucy's friends and family, but his eyes kept finding Emma, who avoided him like poison. During the gift-opening finale, I overheard them behind the garage. "You can't keep avoiding me," Jake hissed. "Watch me," Emma shot back. "This was a mistake. All of it." "Don't get dramatic. We agreed." "No, you decided. I never agreed to any of this." I stepped on a twig. They both whirled around. "Melanie," Jake's voice turned smooth. "Just telling Emma about Lucy's surprise honeymoon plans." Emma laughed bitterly. "Right, the honeymoon." She stormed off. Jake grabbed my arm as I tried to follow. "Remember our chat?" I yanked free. "Touch me again, and Lucy won't be the only one learning the truth." Back at the party, Lucy was glowing with happiness, showing off her gifts. "Isn't this perfect? Everyone I love in one place." I hugged her tight, fighting tears. "You deserve all the happiness in the world." "Then why do you look so sad?" She pulled back, searching my face. "Just emotional. Wedding stuff, you know?" Lucy squeezed my hand. "I'm so glad you're here. I couldn't do this without you." As guests began leaving, I watched Emma slip out without saying goodbye. Jake followed minutes later, claiming a work emergency. Lucy didn't question it. "Need help cleaning up?" I asked her mother. "No, dear. You've done enough." She paused, lowering her voice. "Have you noticed anything odd about Emma lately?" I thought about the dance photo, the whispered arguments, the tension. "Why do you ask?" "She's different, distant, ever since Lucy started dating Jake." She shook her head. "Probably just silly mother's worry." That night, I couldn't sleep. I pulled up Veronica's text with the PI's number. My finger hovered over the call button. "What Lucy doesn't know won't hurt her." Jake had said. But it would. It already was. I hit dial. The private investigator's office smelled like old coffee and cigarettes. Nigel sat across from me, flipping through the photos I'd taken at the bridal shower. So, you want me to follow your best friend's fiancé? He raised an eyebrow. That's a quick way to end a friendship. I want to protect her, I said. Jake isn't who she thinks he is. They never are. He leaned back. My rate is $200 per day, plus expenses. I'll need a week minimum. I pulled out my credit card. Do whatever it takes. You sure you want to know everything I find? His eyes were serious. Sometimes ignorance really is bliss. I'm sure. 3 days later, my phone buzzed during a dress fitting with Lucy. Hold still, the seamstress muttered, pins between her teeth. I checked the message from Nigel. Meeting confirmed. Jake plus Emma tonight, LeBlanc Hotel. Everything okay? Lucy asked, twirling in her wedding dress. Perfect. I forced a smile. You look beautiful. I still can't believe it's happening. Jake's been so secretive about the honeymoon plans. My stomach churned. Speaking of Jake, how's Emma handling everything? Lucy's face fell slightly. She's distant. Mom thinks she's jealous, but that's ridiculous. Emma could have any guy she wants. Including your fiancé, I muttered under my breath. What? Nothing. Just thinking about the bachelorette party plans. That evening, I parked across from LeBlanc Hotel, heart pounding. Nigel's car was already there. My phone rang. They're in the lobby bar, he said. Want me to go in? No, I need to see this myself. The bar was dimly lit, half empty. I spotted them immediately, Jake and Emma in a corner booth, heads close together. His hand covered hers on the table. I slid into a booth nearby, hidden behind a plant. Their voices carried. You can't keep doing this, Emma was saying. The guilt is killing me. It's almost over, Jake replied. Once we're married. Once you're married to my sister, you mean? Emma yanked her hand away. This is sick. Lower your voice. Jake glanced around. We talked about this. The plan. Your plan. God, I was so stupid. Emma stood up. I'm telling her everything. Jake grabbed her wrist. Sit down. Think about what that would do to her, to your family. Let go of me. I couldn't take it anymore. I stepped out from behind the plant. I'd do what she says, Jake. They froze. Emma's face went pale. Jake's eyes turned cold. Melanie, always showing up where you're not wanted. Let her go, I said again. He released Emma's wrist. She grabbed her purse and ran. Emma, wait, I called, but she was gone. Jake stood straightening his jacket. Enjoying the show? Following me now? Someone has to expose you for what you are. He stepped closer, voice low. And what am I exactly? The guy who broke your heart? Get over it. You're marrying my best friend while sleeping with her sister. Prove it. His smile was cruel. Who do you think Lucy will believe? Her loving fiancé or her jealous, bitter friend? You're disgusting. No, I'm smart and rich, thanks to Lucy's family connections. Emma was just practice. I pulled out my phone, hit stop on the recording app. Jake's eyes widened. You wouldn't. Try me. He lunged for my phone. I stepped back, bumping into someone's chair. Everything okay here? A bartender approached. Fine, Jake said smoothly. Just a misunderstanding between old friends. I backed toward the door. Stay away from both of them. Or what? He called after me. You'll ruin Lucy's happiness? That's what telling her will do. Think about it, Melanie. Outside, I leaned against my car, shaking. My phone buzzed. Nigel. Got it all on camera, he said. Photos, video, audio. Want me to keep digging? I thought about Lucy's radiant smile, Emma's guilt-ridden face. Yes, I need everything. There's more, Nigel said. He's been making regular transfers to offshore accounts, and there's another woman in Miami. Of course there is. I closed my eyes. Send me everything you find. Will do. And Melanie, be careful. Guys like this, they don't like being cornered. I drove home in a daze, the recording playing in my head. My phone lit up with a text from Lucy. Dress fitting tomorrow, can't wait. Another message popped up. Emma, please don't tell her. Not yet. Let me explain. Then Jake, delete that recording or you'll regret it. I turned off my phone and poured a large glass of wine. The truth was a weapon now, loaded and ready. But who would it hurt more when I pulled the trigger? The manila envelope landed on my coffee table with a heavy thud. Nigel sat across from me, his expression grim. "It's worse than we thought," he said, spreading out photos and documents. "Much worse." I picked up the first photo. Jake leaving a jewelry store with a woman I didn't recognize. The timestamp showed last week. "That's Amanda," Nigel explained. "His girlfriend in Miami. She thinks they're getting married next spring." My hands trembled as I sifted through more evidence. Bank statements showing massive transfers, text messages between Jake and Emma going back months, photos of them together at hotels, restaurants, always just far enough from home to avoid detection. "There's more," Nigel said, pulling out his laptop. "Watch this." The video showed Jake in a heated argument with an older man outside a law firm. "That's Lucy's father," I whispered. "Recorded yesterday. Turn up the volume." "Blackmailing me?" Lucy's father was saying. "After everything I've done for you?" Jake's voice was cold. "Just make sure the merger goes through before the wedding, or Lucy finds out what really happened to those missing funds." My God. I paused the video. He's using Lucy to get to her father's company? Classic con, Nigel nodded. Get close to the daughter, marry into the family, then squeeze them dry. He's done it before. He handed me another file. 3 previous engagements, all to daughters of wealthy businessmen, all ended mysteriously before the wedding. My phone buzzed. Lucy calling. I let it go to voicemail. "What about Emma?" I asked. "How does she fit in?" "Insurance." Nigel pulled out more photos. "If Lucy backs out, he's got dirt on Emma. If Emma talks, he'll destroy Lucy's relationship with her family. Everyone's trapped." "Not anymore." I gathered the evidence. "I'm showing Lucy everything." "Be careful," Nigel warned. "Men like Jake don't like losing control." As if on cue, my phone buzzed again. "Jake." "What do you want?" I answered. "Meet me, now. The park by your place." "No chance." "Fine. Then I'll tell Lucy about the night you came to my apartment after we broke up. How you begged me to take you back." My blood ran cold. That never happened. Doesn't matter. Who will she believe? Especially when Emma backs up my story. "You wouldn't." "Try me. 20 minutes. Come alone." The park was empty except for Jake, sitting on our old favorite bench. My hand tightened around the pepper spray in my pocket. "Smart girl," he said, noticing my defensive stance. "But unnecessary. I just want to talk." "About what? How you're scamming Lucy's family, or how you're sleeping with her sister?" "About how we can help each other." He patted the bench. "Sit." I remained standing. "I have everything, Jake. Photos, videos, bank records. It's over." "Is it?" He smiled. "Think about Lucy. Sweet, trusting Lucy. This would destroy her. She deserves the truth. Does she deserve the pain? The humiliation? Finding out her sister betrayed her? That her father's company is nearly bankrupt?" He leaned forward. "I can make this worth your while." "You're trying to bribe me now?" "Consider it compensation for past hurts." He pulled out a check. "Enough to start that photography business you always wanted." I laughed bitterly. "You really don't know me at all." "I know you care about Lucy. This way, everyone wins. She gets her fairy tale wedding, her family keeps their dignity, and you become complicit in destroying my best friend's life." I pulled out my phone, showing him Nigel's evidence. "It ends now." His charm vanished. "Show her that, and I'll make sure she knows exactly what kind of friend you are. The jealous ex who couldn't let go, who hired a PI to stalk her fiancé. Better than the con man who's stealing from her family." He stood, towering over me. "Last chance, Melanie. Take the money. Walk away." I stepped back. "Go to hell." "You'll regret this." He crumpled the check. "When Lucy hates you, when her family's reputation is ruined, remember, you chose this." I watched him walk away, then called Veronica. "I have everything," I said, "but Jake's threatening to turn Lucy against me." "Then we show her together," Veronica replied. "She'll believe both of us." "Tomorrow," I decided, "before the rehearsal dinner. Will you come with me?" "Of course." Want me to bring wine? Bring the whole bottle. She's going to need it. That night, I stared at the evidence spread across my bed. My phone lit up with a text from Lucy. Can't wait to see you tomorrow. Love you. Another from Emma. Please, let me tell her myself. I'm begging you. And finally, Jake. Last chance. Delete everything, or tomorrow will be the worst day of your life. I gathered the evidence into a folder. My decision made. Tomorrow, the truth would come out one way or another. I just hoped Lucy would forgive me for being the one to break her heart. The rehearsal dinner was tomorrow, but I couldn't wait. I drove to Emma's apartment, the folder of evidence heavy on the passenger seat. The security guard recognized me, waving me up without calling. Emma opened on the first knock, face pale. I've been expecting you. Her apartment was a mess, clothes everywhere, empty wine bottles on the counter. She'd been crying. We need to talk, I said, holding up the folder. I know what's in there. She collapsed onto her couch. Jake told me about your PI. Then you know I have proof of everything. She grabbed a half-empty wine glass. Going to play hero? Save my sister from the big bad wolf? Someone has to. You don't understand. Emma's voice cracked. I never meant for any of this to happen. Then explain it to me. I sat across from her. Make me understand how you could sleep with your sister's fiancé. He found me at a bar 6 months ago, before he even met Lucy. She wiped her eyes. I knew who he was, your ex, but he was charming and I was lonely. And then he met Lucy at Dad's company party, said we had to keep our relationship secret just for a while. She laughed bitterly. I was so stupid. By the time I realized what he was doing, he had everything he needed to destroy me, to destroy all of us. The missing money from your father's company. Emma's head snapped up. How did you? I have proof of that too. Jake's blackmailing your father. Dad trusted him, gave him access to everything. She took another drink. Jake found irregularities in the books, things Dad had done years ago to keep the company afloat. My phone buzzed. Lucy calling. I ignored it. Why didn't you tell someone? I asked. Tell who? Lucy? Hey sis, your fiancé's been sleeping with me and blackmailing Dad? That would go well. Better than letting her marry him. You don't get it. Emma stood, swaying slightly. If this gets out, Dad goes to prison. The company collapses. Hundreds of people lose their jobs. Jake made sure we all had too much to lose. Another call from Lucy. Then a text. Where are you? Emergency dress fitting. Don't forget. Shit, I muttered. The fitting. Go, Emma said. Play your part. Pretend everything's fine, like I have been. I stood, grabbing the folder. No, this ends now. Come with me to Lucy's. I can't face her. You owe her the truth. From you, not Jake. Emma stared at her empty glass. She'll never forgive me. Maybe not, but she deserves to know who she's really marrying. My phone buzzed again. Veronica. Jake's here at the bridal shop, looking for you. He's going to tell her his version first, I said. We have to go, now. Emma grabbed her keys, hands shaking. What do we say? The truth. All of it. We rushed to my car. 3 missed calls from Lucy, 2 from Jake, 1 from Veronica. Text Lucy, I told Emma as I drove. Tell her you're coming too. She needs to hear this from both of us. Emma typed, then froze. She's not at the shop. Jake took her to Marina Point, where he proposed. I made a U-turn, where he breaks everyone's heart. He's going to tell her I came on to him, Emma whispered, that I'm jealous, unstable. He has photos of me that... God, Lucy will believe him. No, she won't. I handed her my phone. Play the recording from the hotel. Emma listened, tears falling. Her own voice, Jake's threats, all of it. Marina Point's 10 minutes away, I said. Start from the beginning. Tell me everything, every detail Jake could twist. As Emma talked, my phone kept buzzing. Lucy, Jake, Veronica, even Nigel. They're still there, Emma said, checking her phone. Lucy just posted a photo. The caption read, "Pre-wedding surprise from my amazing fiancé." He's going to paint me as the bitter ex, I said. You as the crazy sister. We need to be ready. I have texts, Emma said, proving when we met how he planned everything. I saved them all. Good. We'll need. A truck ran the red light. I swerved hard, tires screeching. Emma screamed. We spun, hitting the curb. When the world stopped spinning, Emma was clutching the folder. I'm okay. You? Fine. I checked my phone, cracked but working. More messages. Lucy. Jake told me everything. How could you? Veronica. Get here now. It's bad. Jake. I warned you. He's already started, Emma whispered. I started the car. Then let's finish it. Marina Point was 5 minutes away. 5 minutes to prepare for the conversation that would change all our lives forever. 5 minutes until Lucy learned the truth, whatever version of it she was ready to hear. Marina Point was packed with evening joggers and couples enjoying the sunset. Lucy stood at the railing, Jake's arm around her. They looked perfect together. It made me sick. Ready? I asked Emma. She gripped the folder tighter. No. We approached slowly. Lucy saw us first, her face hardening. Really, Melanie? Bringing my sister to help spread your lies? Jake smirked behind her. I told you she was desperate. Lucy, please, I started. Just look at what we found. Found? She laughed bitterly. You mean what you manufactured? Jake told me everything. The PI, the stalking, the fake photos. Emma stepped forward. Lucy, listen. Don't. Lucy held up her hand. Jake warned me you'd try this. Said you've been obsessed with him for months. That's not. Emma's voice cracked. Show her the recording, I said, pulling out my phone. Jake moved faster, producing his own phone. You mean like this one? He pressed play. Emma's voice filled the air. I want him, Lucy. I've always wanted him. Melanie's helping me break you up. My stomach dropped. The audio was clearly spliced, manipulated. That's fake, Emma cried. Like the photos you hired someone to Photoshop? Jake asked innocently. The fake bank records? Lucy turned to me, tears in her eyes. I trusted you, both of you. My sister and my best friend, plotting behind my back. We're trying to protect you. I opened the folder, papers flying in the wind. Look, real proof. Stop it, Lucy shouted. Just stop. I've seen Jake's proof. The text between you two, planning this whole thing. Emma grabbed her sister's arm. Lucy, please. I made a terrible mistake. Don't touch me. Lucy jerked away. Jake told me you'd try to confess, make yourself look noble. He showed me everything, how you've been stalking him, sending inappropriate photos. Those photos were from before. Emma stopped, realizing her mistake. Lucy's face went white. Before what? Jake stepped in smoothly. Before they started working together to break us up. Emma's been helping Melanie spy on us for months. That's not, I started. Then explain this. Lucy thrust her phone at me. On the screen was a text conversation between Jake and Emma, completely fabricated, discussing their plan to protect Lucy from Jake. He faked those, Emma cried. Like you faked these? Jake pulled out his own stack of documents. I had them analyzed, all forged. Joggers were stopping now, watching the scene unfold. Veronica appeared, pushing through the crowd. Lucy, she called. Don't listen to him. Et tu, Veronica. Jake smiled sadly. Let me guess, they dragged you into their scheme too? Lucy backed away from all of us. I can't believe you'd all do this to me. We're not doing anything to you, I said desperately. We're doing this for you. By trying to ruin my happiness, my wedding, my relationship with my sister. He's the one ruining everything, Emma shouted. I've been sleeping with him for months. The crowd gasped. Lucy froze. Jake's face transformed into perfect shock. See what I mean, baby? They'll say anything now. Emma's been obsessed with me since that charity gala. The gala, I said. The photo in the red dress was photoshopped. Jake cut in smoothly. They hired someone to edit Emma into our photos. I can prove it. Lucy was shaking now. I want everyone to leave, now. Lucy, please, Emma begged. Go, all of you. Jake wrapped his arms around her. It's okay, baby. I'm here. I caught his eye over Lucy's shoulder. He was enjoying this, the bastard. The offshore accounts. I tried one last time. The missing money from your father's company. Already explained, Jake said calmly. Show her, sweetheart. Lucy pulled out more papers. Legitimate-looking documents showing Jake as a whistleblower, exposing corporate fraud. He'd thought of everything. Leave, Lucy whispered. Don't come to the wedding. Any of you. Emma broke down sobbing. Veronica led her away. I stood my ground. Lucy, you've known me for 20 years. Known him for 6 months. Please. 20 years of lying to me. She turned, eyes cold. You never told me you dated Jake. Never told me about Emma. Never told me anything real. I was trying to protect you. No, you were trying to control me, like you always have. She leaned into Jake. He's the only one who's been honest. The irony was suffocating. One day, I said quietly, you'll see the truth. I just hope it's not too late. The truth? She laughed harshly. The truth is, I never really knew you at all. Goodbye, Melanie. I watched them walk away, Jake's arm around her shoulders. He turned back once, winking at me. Veronica appeared beside me, helping me gather the scattered evidence. What now? I looked at the folder in my hands, all the proof in the world, and it hadn't mattered. Now, I said, we find a way to make her see what's right in front of her. The sun set over Marina Point, painting everything blood red. Somewhere in the distance, Emma was still crying. The wedding was in full swing when I walked into the reception hall. Heads turned, whispers spread. I hadn't been invited, but I wasn't leaving until Lucy knew everything. You shouldn't be here. Veronica met me at the door, looking nervous. Security's been told to watch for you. Has she opened our package yet? No, Jake intercepted it. I clutched my bag tighter, feeling the weight of the final evidence inside. The one thing Jake couldn't explain away. Where is she? Getting ready for the first dance. Melanie, wait. But I was already moving through the crowd. Lucy stood near the dance floor, radiant in her wedding dress. Jake was nowhere in sight. Lucy. She spun around. I told you not to come. Check your phone, right now. Security, she called. Please. I grabbed her arm. 1 minute. That's all I'm asking. 20 years of friendship. Don't I deserve that much? She hesitated, then nodded to the approaching security guard. 1 minute. I pulled out my phone, showed her the live video feed. This is happening right now in the bridal suite. The footage showed Jake and Emma clearly arguing. Lucy's hand flew to her mouth. How did you... Nigel planted cameras this morning. Just watch. Through the phone's speaker, we heard Emma. I'm telling her everything. Right now. Jake grabbed her arm. You really want to destroy your sister's wedding day? Better than destroying her life. The pregnancy test was positive, Jake. I'm not letting you trap her like you trapped me. Lucy's champagne glass shattered on the floor. Guests turned to stare. That's not real, she whispered. Another fake. Call Emma right now, I said. Ask her yourself. Lucy's hands shook as she dialed. On my phone's screen, we watched Emma answer in the bridal suite. Lucy? Emma's voice came through both phones. Is it true? Lucy asked. Are you pregnant? Silence. Then, yes. Lucy swayed. I steadied her. How long? 2 months. Emma was crying now. I tried to tell you so many times. He threatened to expose Dad's company, to ruin everything. Where is he? Lucy's voice turned to steel. Right here. Jake appeared on screen, grabbing Emma's phone. Lucy, baby, don't listen. Lucy ended the call. The bridal suite. Now. We rushed upstairs, Lucy's wedding dress rustling. She threw open the door just as Jake was backing Emma into a corner. Get away from my sister. Jake spun around, charm instantly in place. Sweetheart, I can explain. Explain what? How you got my sister pregnant? How you've been blackmailing my family? They're lying. Emma's obsessed with me. She's making this up. I heard everything, Jake. I saw everything. Lucy's voice was deadly calm. The cameras don't lie. Cameras? His face darkened. You bitch, he snarled at me. You just couldn't let it go. No, I said. I couldn't let you destroy my best friend's life. He lunged at me. Lucy stepped between us. Touch her, she said quietly. And I call the police. Touch my sister, and I call my father's lawyers. Either way, you lose. You really think you can stop me? He laughed. I own your family now. 1 word from me. Already taken care of, I cut in. Nigel sent everything to the SEC this morning. All the evidence of your previous cons, the blackmail, the offshore accounts. It's over, Jake. His composure cracked. You're bluffing. Lucy pulled out her phone, dialed. Daddy, it's time. We watched Jake's face as he realized he'd lost everything. He backed toward the door. This isn't over. Yes, it is. Lucy's father appeared in the doorway, flanked by security. The authorities are very interested in speaking with you. Jake tried to run. The security guards caught him easily. You okay? I asked Lucy as they led Jake away. She turned to Emma, who stood trembling in the corner. Why didn't you tell me sooner? I was scared, Emma whispered, ashamed. He made me believe I'd lose you forever. Lucy pulled her sister into a fierce hug. You'll never lose me. I moved toward the door, giving them privacy, but Lucy caught my hand. Mel, wait. Her eyes filled with tears. I'm so sorry I didn't believe you. You believe me now. That's what matters. What do I do about... She gestured at the reception below. I have an idea. Veronica appeared in the doorway, grinning. How about a different kind of party? Lucy looked at her ruined wedding dress, her crying sister, the chaos around us. Then she laughed, a real free laugh. You know what? Screw it. Tell the DJ to play something fun. Tell the guests. Tell them the truth. All of it. You sure? I asked. She grabbed both mine and Emma's hands. I'm sure. No more lies. No more secrets. Just us. Together. We headed downstairs. 3 best friends again. Stronger than before. The truth had hurt, but it had also set us free. Behind us, we could hear Jake's protests as he was led away. But ahead of us was nothing but music, laughter, and the promise of better days to come. The morning sun streamed through Lucy's kitchen window as I poured 3 cups of coffee. Emma sat at the counter, absently rubbing her growing belly, while Lucy sorted through a stack of mail. Look what came. Lucy held up an official-looking envelope. Jake's sentencing details. You don't have to go, I said, sliding her coffee across the counter. Yes, I do. She opened the letter. We all do. I want him to see us together. Strong. Emma took a shaky breath. The prosecutor says with all the evidence, plus his previous victims coming forward, he's looking at 15 years minimum. Good. I sat down with them. Maybe his next get-rich-quick scheme can be writing a prison memoir. Lucy laughed, then stopped suddenly, staring at another envelope. It's from Amanda, his Miami girlfriend. The one who testified? Emma asked. Lucy nodded, opening it carefully. A handwritten letter fell out, along with several photos. She says thank you, Lucy read, for stopping him before he did to me what he did to you. She's helping other women he scammed come forward. How many now? I asked. 12. Emma's voice was quiet. 12 families he tried to destroy. Lucy reached for her sister's hand. But he didn't destroy us. The doorbell rang. Lucy's father walked in, carrying breakfast pastries in a thick folder. Morning, girls. He kissed both his daughters' foreheads. Brought you something better than legal documents, but we need to discuss these too. He spread out papers across the counter. Company documents, bank statements, evidence of Jake's manipulation. The board voted unanimously, he said. All charges dropped, company reputation intact. We're actually coming out ahead. Seems exposing corporate fraud makes investors trust you more. And the missing money? Lucy asked. Recovered most of it from Jake's accounts. The rest? He smiled at Emma. Will be set aside for my future grandchild's education. Emma burst into tears. Happy ones this time. Lucy hugged her tight. Dad, Lucy said suddenly, remember how you always said I should join the family business? He raised an eyebrow. Changed your mind about being just the CEO's daughter? I want to start a foundation. Help other women spot con men like Jake. Provide legal support, counseling, whatever they need. Count me in, I said. My photography business can wait. Me too. Emma wiped her eyes. After the baby comes, we can call it Phoenix, Lucy finished, rising from the ashes and all that. Speaking of rising, her father checked his watch. Court starts in 2 hours. We got ready in comfortable silence, each lost in thought. As we headed to the cars, Veronica pulled up. Thought you might need moral support, she said, hugging each of us. Actually, Lucy smiled, I need my best friends, all of them. The courthouse steps were crowded with reporters. Jake's other victims stood together, Amanda among them. They nodded as we approached. Ready? I asked Lucy. She squared her shoulders, ready to end this. Finally. Inside, Jake sat in his orange jumpsuit, shoulders slumped. He looked smaller somehow, less threatening. He turned as we entered, eyes widening at our united front. The judge called for victim impact statements. One by one, women stepped forward to tell their stories. Emma spoke about manipulation and fear. Amanda described years of lies. Then Lucy stood. "Your Honor," she began, "Jake Williams didn't just try to steal money. He tried to steal trust, faith in love, faith in family, faith in friendship." She turned to face him directly. But he failed, because real love, real friendship, they're stronger than any con. Jake wouldn't meet her eyes. The sentence came down, 18 years. No possibility of early parole. As they led him away, he finally spoke. "Lucy, wait." "No," she cut him off. "You don't get to speak anymore. You've said enough for a lifetime." Outside, reporters shouted questions. Lucy stepped up to the microphones, Emma and I flanking her. "Yes, Jake Williams conned me," she said clearly. But his biggest mistake was thinking money was the most valuable thing he could steal. He forgot about loyalty, about truth, about the power of women standing together. She announced the Phoenix Foundation right there, cameras flashing. Amanda and the other victims joined us, sharing contact information, ready to help. Later, back at Lucy's kitchen counter, we raised our coffee cups. "To karma," Veronica said. "To justice," Emma added. "To friendship," I offered. Lucy smiled, tears in her eyes. "To all of it, and to us." We clinked cups, the morning sun painting everything in shades of gold. On Lucy's fridge, held by a Phoenix magnet, hung a new photo. All of us on the courthouse steps, heads held high, unbreakable. "You know what?" Lucy said softly. "I finally understand what real love looks like. It looks like this, like us." Emma patted her belly. "Like family." "Like truth," I added. "Like rising," Veronica finished. We sat together in the warm kitchen, planning our foundation, sharing stories, healing. Outside, the world kept turning. But in here, in this moment, everything was exactly as it should be. The end wasn't really an ending at all. It was a beginning, stronger, wiser, and together.
My childhood memories are mostly happy ones, at least until I turned 12. That's when everything changed. I remember that morning like it was yesterday. My dad was packing his bags, while Mom was crying in their bedroom. I stood in the doorway of my room, confused and scared, watching him walk down the stairs with 2 large suitcases. No explanation, no goodbye hug, nothing. Just the sound of the door closing and his car starting up in the driveway. I ran to the window and watched his silver Honda disappear down our street, thinking he'd turn around at any moment. But he didn't. I found Mom in the kitchen later that day, her eyes red and puffy from crying. "Why did Dad leave?" I asked, hoping she could help me make sense of it all. She slammed her coffee mug down so hard I jumped. "Because he's a selfish, terrible person, Sheila. He abandoned his own child and he won't even pay child support. That's the kind of man your father is." I didn't understand what child support meant back then, but the bitterness in Mom's voice scared me. I'd never seen her like this before. When I tried to ask more questions, she cut me off sharply. "Just forget about him. He doesn't deserve our tears." At first, I couldn't stop thinking about Dad. I'd lie awake at night, wondering if I'd done something wrong, if somehow this was my fault. I kept expecting him to call or show up at my school, but he never did. As weeks turned into months, the pain started to dull. Mom was right, he was a traitor who'd abandoned us. I threw myself into school and my hobbies, trying to be the perfect daughter for Mom. She seemed so broken after Dad left, and I wanted to make her happy. We developed new routines, just the 2 of us. We'd have pizza and movie nights on Fridays, and sometimes she'd let me help her in the garden on weekends. Things were different, but we were managing. Then, about 2 years after Dad left, Mom started dating again. That's when Steve entered our lives. He seemed nice enough at first, bringing mom flowers, taking us both out to dinner, asking about my school. But looking back now, I should have seen the warning signs. "Your mom tells me you've been staying out late with your friends," he said one evening, about 3 months into their relationship. His tone was casual, but there was something in his eyes that made me uncomfortable. "Just until 6, I said. Mom said it was okay." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Well, things are going to be a little different around here from now on. A 14-year-old girl needs structure." I remember looking at Mom, expecting her to say something, to stand up for me. But she just smiled adoringly at Steve and squeezed his hand. That's when I first felt it, that slight shift in the ground beneath my feet, like everything I knew was about to change again. My entire life changed after Mom and Steve got married. First, it was a strict curfew. I had to be home by 5 p.m. sharp, no exceptions. Then came the chore chart, detailing every single task I needed to complete each day. If I missed even one item, Steve would ground me. "But I have volleyball practice after school on Thursdays," I protested when he demanded I clean the entire kitchen by 6 p.m. every day. "Then you'll have to quit volleyball," Steve said flatly. "Your responsibilities at home come first." I looked to Mom for support, but she just nodded along. "Steve's right, honey. We need to teach you discipline, or you'll end up like your father." That became her go-to phrase whenever I complained, "or you'll end up like your father." It stung every time, making me feel guilty for even questioning Steve's rules. The rules kept piling up. I wasn't allowed to use my phone after 8 p.m. My homework had to be done at the kitchen table, where Steve could monitor me. I needed permission to hang out with friends, which was rarely granted. Even my clothes became an issue. Steve insisted on approving my outfits before I left for school. One day, I came home 10 minutes late because my biology teacher wanted to discuss my project after class. Steve was waiting at the door, his face red with anger. "Where were you?" he demanded. "Mr. Peterson needed to talk about." "No excuses," he cut me off. "You're grounded for 2 weeks. Hand over your phone." "But that's not fair," I protested. "I was talking to a teacher." 3 weeks now," he said, holding out his hand. "Want to make it 4? Mom watched this whole exchange from the kitchen doorway, saying nothing. Later, when I tried to explain to her what happened, she just sighed. "Steve is trying to teach you responsibility, Sheila. Something your father never did." Things got even more complicated when Mom announced she was pregnant. She was beaming with joy, and Steve couldn't stop grinning. I tried to be happy for them, but something in my gut told me things were about to get worse. My half-brother Tommy was born when I was 15 and a half. He was cute, I'll give him that, but his arrival turned my life upside down. Suddenly, I wasn't just responsible for my usual chores, I became an unpaid babysitter. "You need to watch Tommy while we go out," Mom would say, already putting on her coat. "But I have a history test tomorrow." "Family comes first," Steve would interrupt. "Besides, we're supporting you since your father doesn't send any money. The least you can do is help out." I watched them go on their dinner dates, while I sat home with Tommy, trying to study with a crying baby. Steve bought Tommy designer clothes and expensive toys, while I was told we couldn't afford new school supplies. When Tommy cried at night, I was the one who had to get up and check on him, even on school nights. "He's your brother," Mom would say when I complained about being exhausted. "And since your father doesn't pay alimony, you need to contribute to this household somehow." By the time I turned 16, I was sick of hearing about how much of a financial burden I was. Every time Steve or Mom opened their mouths, it was about how much they had to spend on me. So I decided to do something about it. There was this small cafe near our house, the Morning Brew, that was always looking for help. I walked in one afternoon after school and talked to the manager, Sarah. She must have seen something in my eyes, because she hired me on the spot. The pay wasn't great, minimum wage, plus whatever tips I could get, but it was something. I worked from 4 to 8 p.m. on weekdays and longer shifts on weekends. The next 2 years were brutal. I'd wake up at 6 a.m. to take care of Tommy, go to school, work at the cafe, come home to more chores and Tommy duty, then try to squeeze in homework somewhere between everything else. My grades started slipping, there just weren't enough hours in the day. When graduation came around, I was devastated to learn I didn't have enough points for a scholarship. I remember sitting at our kitchen table, acceptance letter in hand, trying to explain to Mom and Steve about the tuition costs. Maybe we could figure something out together? I suggested hopefully. I could work more hours, and if you could help with just part of it. Steve laughed. Actually laughed. You should have thought about that before letting your grades drop. We don't have money for your college, Mom added, bouncing Tommy on her knee. If you'd studied harder instead of hanging out with your work friends all the time. I ended up taking an entry-level position at Wilson Trading Company. The hours were long, the work was mind-numbing, and my supervisor, Mr. Peters, seemed to take pleasure in pointing out every tiny mistake I made. But it was a real job with a real paycheck. Then came the bombshell. After my third paycheck, Steve called a family meeting. Now that you're working full-time, he said, it's time you started paying rent. I stared at him in disbelief. But I already give Mom money for groceries. That's for food, Mom jumped in. This would be for your room, utilities, everything else. They had it all calculated, a number that would eat up almost half my monthly salary. I wanted to argue, to point out how unfair it was, but what choice did I have? My salary wouldn't cover rent anywhere else in town, not with food and other expenses. The next 2 years felt like being trapped in quicksand. Every month, I handed over a chunk of my salary, watching Steve and Mom spend money on Tommy's private swimming lessons and expensive toys, while I wore the same clothes I'd had since high school. But I kept my head down and worked hard. Mr. Peters eventually noticed, and when a supervisor position opened up, he recommended me for it. The raise that came with the promotion wasn't huge, but it was enough. Enough to finally get out. I found a small one-bedroom apartment across town. It wasn't much, the paint was peeling and the neighbors were loud, but it was mine. The day I moved out, Mom barely looked up from helping Tommy with his homework. Make sure you leave your key, was all she said. Living on my own wasn't easy. The apartment was small and needed repairs I couldn't afford, but at least it was mine. I kept working at Wilson Trading, taking every overtime shift I could get. Still, after rent, utilities, and basic necessities, there was barely anything left to save. I'd watch my coworkers with college degrees moving up the corporate ladder while I stayed stuck in the same position. My boss had even told me directly, Sheila, you're one of our best workers, but without a degree, there's only so far you can go here. College remained this distant dream. I'd sometimes browse university websites during my lunch break, calculating tuition costs, and always coming up short. Every scholarship I found required either better high school grades than I had or full-time student status, which I couldn't afford. Mom and Steve rarely called. When they did, it was usually Mom asking if I was coming to Tommy's school events or soccer games. I usually made up excuses. I couldn't bear watching Steve beam with pride while my mother fawned over her perfect son. Then came that night, just after my 22nd birthday. I was heating up leftover Chinese food when someone knocked on my door. When I looked through the peephole, my heart stopped. There he was, my father, looking 10 years older than he should. Sheila? His voice was exactly as I remembered it. Please, can we talk? My first instinct was to slam the door in his face. How dare he show up after 10 years? But something in his appearance made me pause. He looked sick, almost frail. 5 minutes, I said, keeping the door chain on. That's all I ask, he replied, and something in his voice made me remove the chain. He sat at my small kitchen table, his hands shaking slightly as he declined my automatic offer of coffee. Up close, he looked even worse, pale and thin, nothing like the strong, competent man from my childhood memories. I need to tell you why I left, he began, his voice barely above a whisper. I'm not your biological father. The words hit me like a physical blow. I sat down hard in the chair opposite him. What? I had suspicions, he continued, his voice steady now. Your mother had been acting strange, protective of her phone. I found messages. I did a DNA test. When I confronted her, she confessed to having an affair. My head was spinning. I gripped the edge of the table to steady myself. She begged me to forgive her, he went on. But I couldn't stay. Every time I looked at you, I saw her betrayal. It wasn't fair to you, you were innocent in all this, but I couldn't handle it. But I always paid the alimony. I couldn't be there for you, but I made sure you were taken care of financially. What do you mean you paid alimony? I asked, my voice shaking. Mom always said you never sent a penny. She and Steve kept telling me I had to help with Tommy and pay rent because you weren't supporting me. Dad, or I guess not really my dad, reached into his jacket and pulled out a thick envelope. Inside were bank statements, years of them, showing monthly transfers to my mother's account. $2,000 every month, without fail, he said quietly. I set up automatic payments the day I left. I stared at the papers, my hands trembling. Each statement showed the same thing, regular monthly payments, all clearly labeled child support, Sheila. Years of them. Tens of thousands of dollars that I'd never seen a cent of. I felt sick. All those years of being told I was a burden, of working at the cafe while trying to study, of paying rent to my own mother while she had been receiving money meant for me every single month. Why are you here now? I asked, pushing the statements away. After all this time? He shifted uncomfortably in his chair, suddenly looking even more frail. I have some news, Sheila. 2 pieces, actually. First, I can't have children. Secondly, I'm dying, Sheila. Cancer. Doctors give me 2 years, at most. I sat there, stunned. This man who I'd spent years hating, who I'd blamed for everything wrong in my life, was sitting at my kitchen table telling me he was dying. After I left, I threw myself into work, he continued. Made some smart investments. I've done well for myself, very well. But I have no family, no children of my own. And despite everything, despite not being your biological father, I've never stopped thinking of you as my daughter. What are you saying? I want to make you my heir, Sheila. Everything I have, the house, the investment properties, my savings, I want it all to go to you. The room started spinning. I gripped the edge of the table, trying to process what he was saying. This man, who I'd thought abandoned me, had been supporting me all along. And now he was dying and wanted to leave me his fortune? I need time to think about this, I managed to say. He nodded and stood up slowly. Of course, here's my card. Call me when you're ready to talk. I walked him to the door in a daze. Before he left, he turned to me one last time. For what it's worth, Sheila, I'm sorry. Not for leaving your mother, she made her choices. But I'm sorry for leaving you. I should have found a way to tell you the truth. I barely slept that night. By morning, I knew what I had to do. I drove to Mom and Steve's house, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tight, my knuckles turned white. Tommy was at school, and Steve's car wasn't in the driveway, perfect. Mom answered the door in her gardening clothes, looking surprised to see me. Sheila, what are you doing here? We need to talk, I said, walking past her into the house. The living room looked exactly the same, Tommy's toys everywhere, his school photos dominating the walls. Dad came to see me yesterday. Mom froze halfway to the couch. What? Yeah, interesting conversation. He wants to make me his heir. Apparently, he's done pretty well for himself. He what? Mom's face turned red. After abandoning you? After refusing to pay a cent in child support? And you're just going to forgive him because he's got money now? I couldn't help it, I started laughing. A harsh, bitter laugh that made Mom take a step back. That's funny, Mom. Really funny. Because he showed me his bank statements. Every single month for 6 years, $2,000 in child support payments. Where did all that money go, Mom? Because it sure didn't go to me. The color drained from her face. Sheila, And that's not even the best part, I continued, pulling the bank statements from my bag. He also told me why he really left. About the DNA test. About your affair. Mom sank onto the couch, her hands shaking. You don't understand. Oh, I understand perfectly. You cheated on him, got pregnant with me, and then lied about it for years. Then when he found out and left, you lied some more. You took his money meant for me, and used it for yourself and your new family. I needed that money, Mom suddenly burst out. Do you know how hard it was being a single mother? And then when Tommy came along. Don't you dare try to justify this, I shouted. You made me work through high school. You made me pay rent. You watched me struggle to save for college while you had thousands of dollars of my money sitting in your account. Mom's shock transformed into anger. I raised you. I took care of you. And now you're going to side with him because he's dangling his money in front of you. Side with him? He might not be my biological father, but at least he was honest with me. Which is more than I can say for you. She stood up, her face hard. If you accept his money, we're done. Do you understand me? You'll no longer be welcome in this family. I looked around the room, at Tommy's toys, at the family photos that I wasn't in, at this house where I'd never felt at home. That's rich, Mom. Really rich. You made it clear years ago that I wasn't part of this family. The only difference now is that I finally understand why. I walked out of the house, letting the door slam behind me. Mom didn't try to stop me. I was at work when my phone started blowing up with notifications. Aunt Carol had texted, "Have you seen your mother's Facebook post?" I waited until my lunch break to look. There it was, a long paragraph about her ungrateful daughter who had abandoned her loving family for a deadbeat dad's money. Mom had really outdone herself with the drama, painting herself as the sacrificing single mother and me as the greedy, heartless child. The comments were even worse. I can't believe Sheila would do this to you. After everything you've done for her. She always was a difficult child. Money changes people. My relatives, people who hadn't bothered to contact me in years, were suddenly experts on my life. My hands shook as I started typing my response. Since Mom wants to air our family drama on Facebook, let's tell the whole story. Let's talk about how she cheated on Dad and lied about me being his daughter. Let's talk about the DNA test that made him leave. And while we're at it, let's talk about the $2,000 monthly child support payments he made for 6 years. Money I never saw a cent of. I have the bank statements to prove it. Where did all that money go, Mom? I attached photos of the bank statements, making sure to blur out the account numbers, but leaving the payment amounts clear. The response was immediate. The same relatives who'd been condemning me minutes earlier were now flooding Mom's post with questions. Is this true? Sarah, what's going on? $2,000 a month for 6 years? That's $144,000. Mom deleted her post within hours. My phone kept ringing with calls from relatives, but I ignored them all. Instead, I pulled out Dad's business card and dialed his number. We met for dinner that weekend. It was awkward at first. 10 years is a long time, but somehow felt right. He told me stories about his business ventures, and I told him about my job. When I mentioned my dream of going to college, his eyes lit up. Let me help, he said. It's the least I can do after all these years. 2 weeks later, I was enrolled in evening management classes at the local university. For the first time, I felt like my life was moving forward instead of standing still. Dad and I started having weekly dinners. Sometimes we talked about the past, about what really happened. Other times we just talked about normal things, work, school, movies. He wasn't my biological father, but he was becoming something just as important, a real parent. Mom tried calling a few times after I exposed her lies, but I let it go to voicemail. Steve sent a text about tearing the family apart. I blocked his number. Tommy asked me at the grocery store why I didn't come to his games anymore. That one hurt, but I just wasn't ready to deal with any of them. Those 4 years with Dad were a gift I never expected to have. The doctors had given him 2 years at most, but he was always stubborn. "I'm not going anywhere until I see you graduate," he'd say, and somehow he made it happen. We made the most of our time together. Between my evening classes and his treatments, we'd meet for dinner at least twice a week. He told me stories about his life, his business ventures, and even shared old photos from when I was little. Sometimes we'd just sit in comfortable silence, watching old movies or sharing a pizza. "You know," he said one evening, about a year after we reconnected, "I spent 10 years regretting leaving you. Even after I found out you weren't biologically mine, I never stopped loving you as my daughter." I remember squeezing his hand, unable to speak through the tears. He came to all my college presentations, sat proudly in the front row even when he was too weak to stand for long. During his better days, he taught me about business, about investing, about all the things he'd learned building his fortune. The last few months were hard. The cancer had spread, and he spent more time in the hospital than out. I took time off work to be there with him, studying for my finals in the uncomfortable hospital chair beside his bed. "You don't have to stay," he'd say. "Try and make me leave," I'd answer. He was there for my graduation, though he had to watch via video call from his hospital room. I brought my diploma to him right after the ceremony, still wearing my cap and gown. His smile was weak, but his eyes were bright with pride. "I always knew you could do it," he whispered. 2 weeks later, he was gone. I was holding his hand when he took his last breath, telling him about my new job offer and how I was going to use everything he'd taught me. The inheritance was substantial, a beautiful house in the suburbs, 2 downtown apartments, and enough money to never work again if I chose not to. But more valuable than any of that were the lessons he'd taught me, the love he'd shown me, and the truth he'd given me. I moved into one of the apartments, rented out the other one and the house. The rental income more than covers my expenses, but I kept my job anyway. Dad taught me the value of building something for myself. Some of my relatives still try to play peacemaker, suggesting family reunions or holiday gatherings with Mom, Steve, and Tommy. I always decline politely. I've made my peace with the past, I tell them when we meet for holiday dinners, carefully scheduled when I know Mom won't be there. But that doesn't mean I need to revisit it. They understand, or at least they've stopped arguing. Aunt Carol even apologized for believing Mom's Facebook post without hearing my side. Uncle Jim admitted he'd had suspicions about the child support money for years, but never said anything. Sometimes I drive past my old house and see Tommy playing in the yard, taller now, looking more like Steve every day. Mom still lives there with her perfect little family, posting perfect family photos on Facebook. I don't feel angry anymore when I see them. I don't feel much of anything, really. Dad taught me that family isn't about blood, it's about love, truth, and choosing to be there for someone even when it's hard. He chose to be my father twice, first when he married Mom, and again when he came back into my life. That means more to me than any biological connection ever could. Growing up in our small town wasn't easy, especially in our modest 2-story house, where the dynamics were always complicated. I'm Molly, and this is the story of how I learned that sometimes the people who hurt you most are the ones who should love you most. My father worked long hours at the local mine. He was quiet, tired, and usually buried himself in the newspaper after dinner. My mother, on the other hand, was anything but quiet. She'd spend endless hours sprawled on our worn-out couch, phone pressed to her ear, cackling with her friends while some mindless talk show droned on in the background. "Linda, you won't believe what happened on The Real Housewives today," she'd squeal into the phone, completely ignoring the pile of unwashed dishes in the sink or the empty refrigerator that needed restocking. Then there was my younger brother, Riley. Mom's precious golden child. Even from my earliest memories, the difference in how she treated us was crystal clear. While I wore hand-me-downs and dollar store shoes, Riley got the latest gaming consoles and brand-name clothes. "Mom, my shoes are falling apart," I remember telling her one day when I was 12. "Could we maybe get new ones this weekend?" She barely looked up from her phone. "There's no money for shoes right now, Molly. Besides, those still look fine to me." But later that same week, I watched her return from the mall with a shopping bag full of new clothes for Riley. "Look what I got for my special boy," she cooed, while he eagerly dug through the bag. Dinner was always a testament to her negligence, microwaved frozen dinners or takeout containers scattered across our kitchen table. Sometimes, I'd stare at the sad, plastic-wrapped meals and dream about having a normal mom who actually cooked real food. By the time I reached high school, I knew college wasn't in my future. There were no savings, no college fund, not even discussions about higher education. The reality of our financial situation hit me hard when I overheard my parents arguing one night. "We can't keep living like this," my father's voice was strained. "The bills are piling up." "Well, what do you expect me to do about it?" Mom snapped back. "You're the one who should be making more money." That's when I made my decision. The day I turned 15, I walked into the cafe 3 blocks from our house and asked for a job. The manager, Mrs. Peterson, took one look at my determined face and gave me a chance as a part-time waitress. "You've got good instincts, kid," she told me after my first week. "Keep this up, and you'll go far." For the first time in my life, I felt proud of myself. But even that small victory was tainted by my mother's reaction. "A waitress?" she scoffed when I told her about my new job. "Well, I suppose someone has to do it. Just don't let it interfere with taking care of your brother's needs." After graduating high school, I landed a full-time waitressing position at Giovanni's, one of the nicer restaurants in town. My 3 years of experience at the cafe made me an attractive hire, and the manager didn't even hesitate when offering me the job. The salary was significantly better than what I'd been making at the cafe, but that wasn't even the best part. Mr. Romano had this amazing policy where servers could take home leftover food after their shifts. In a high-end Italian restaurant, these weren't just any leftovers, we're talking about gourmet pasta, premium steaks, and fresh-baked desserts that would otherwise go to waste. The first time I brought home a container of fettuccine alfredo and garlic bread, my family's eyes lit up like it was Christmas morning. I thought this might finally be something that would make them appreciate me. How wrong I was. It quickly became a pattern. I'd bring home these beautiful meals, carefully packed and still warm, only to find that by the time I got a chance to eat, there would be nothing but scraps left. Riley always got first pick, followed by Mom and Dad, and whatever remained, if anything, was supposed to be mine. One evening, after a particularly long shift, I came home with a magnificent portion of osso buco that the chef had specifically saved for me. By the time I finished changing out of my work clothes, I found Riley scraping the last bits from the container. "Hey," I protested. "I was going to eat that. Couldn't you have at least saved me some?" Mom's head snapped up from her phone. "Molly, how dare you be so selfish? You should be ashamed of yourself." "Selfish? I'm the one bringing this food home. You get to eat this fancy food all day at work," she snapped back. "Your brother only gets to enjoy it once a day. You should be grateful we're not asking you to bring more." I stood there, fighting back tears of frustration. "I don't eat at work, Mom. I'm too busy serving other people." "Well, that's your choice," she replied dismissively, already turning back to her phone. "Nobody's stopping you from eating there." Riley just smirked and licked his fork clean, not even bothering to hide his satisfaction. The worst part wasn't even the hunger, it was the realization that in their eyes, I would always be worth less than my brother, no matter what I contributed to the family. 2 years flew by, and Riley finally graduated high school. I remember sitting at his graduation ceremony, watching him receive his diploma, and thinking that maybe, just maybe, things would change now. Maybe he'd finally start contributing to the household like I had been doing since I was 15. "So, Riley," I asked him the day after graduation, while he was sprawled on the couch with his game controller, "have you started looking for jobs yet?" He barely glanced away from his video game. "Nah, I'm taking a gap year. Need some time to figure out what I want to do with my life, you know?" A gap year? I couldn't hide the disbelief in my voice. "But we can barely make ends meet as it is." "Oh, honey," Mom chimed in from her usual spot on the recliner, "Riley's still too young to work. He needs time to find his path." I wanted to scream. Too young? He was the same age I was when I started working full-time. But instead, I took a deep breath and tried to reason with them. "Mom, I started working when I was 15. Riley's 18 now." "That was different," Mom waved her hand dismissively. "You wanted to work. Riley needs to focus on his future." And so began Riley's gap year. Every day, I'd leave for my morning shift at the restaurant, and he'd still be asleep. When I'd return in the evening, he'd either be in his room playing video games or out with his friends, the house just as messy as I'd left it. The dishes would pile up in the sink, the trash would overflow, and heaven forbid anyone ask him to help with laundry. I couldn't take it anymore. "Why doesn't he have to work?" I confronted my parents one evening during dinner. "Everyone else his age has a job." Dad shifted uncomfortably in his chair while Mom immediately went on the defensive. "Stop attacking your brother. You don't understand how hard it is for him. The job market is terrible right now, and he's suffering enough without you making him feel worse." I tried a different approach. "Look, we actually need delivery drivers at the restaurant. I could put in a good word for him. It's a decent starting salary, plus tips." Riley chose that moment to emerge from his cave, presumably for his evening beer run with friends. "A delivery driver?" he scoffed, grabbing his keys from the counter. "I didn't get straight A's to become some delivery boy, Molly. I know my worth." "And what exactly do you think you're worth right now?" I muttered under my breath. He paused at the door, turning to face me with that smug expression I'd grown to despise. "Unlike some people, I have standards. When I get a job, it'll be something worthy of my abilities. Something with a future. Not everyone wants to be a waitress their whole life." The way he said waitress, like it was something dirty, made my blood boil. But before I could respond, he was gone, the screen door slamming behind him. It was Riley's 19th birthday when I finally understood just how deep my family's favoritism ran. That morning, I was getting ready for work when I heard excited voices from outside. Curious, I looked out my window to see my parents presenting Riley with a car. Yes, a car. It wasn't new, a used Honda Civic with some scratches and dents, but it was still a functioning vehicle. I stood there, frozen, watching Riley jump around like a kid at Christmas while Mom took pictures with her phone. I thought about the bus I'd be catching in 30 minutes, the same bus I'd been taking to work for years, rain or shine. The same bus where I'd often stand for the entire 40-minute ride after a grueling 8-hour shift on my feet. "Do you like it, sweetie?" Mom's voice drifted up to my window. "We know it's not brand new, but it's perfect for getting around town." "This is awesome," Riley exclaimed, already sitting in the driver's seat. "I can't wait to show the guys." I didn't say anything before leaving for work. What could I say? That I'd been working for years and couldn't afford a car while my unemployed brother just got one handed to him? That I was tired of being treated like a second-class citizen in my own family? But the real surprise came that evening during my shift at Giovanni's. I was serving a table near the window when I saw them walk in, my entire family, dressed in their best clothes, with Riley leading the way like he owned the place. "Molly," Mom waved me over dramatically. "We're here to celebrate Riley's birthday properly." My brother grinned at me. "We want the best table in the banquet hall. My friends Mike and Dave will be here in half an hour. And we want you to be our server," Mom added. "Only you. We don't trust anyone else to make this special evening perfect." I wanted to tell them I already had tables assigned in my section, that the banquet hall was typically reserved in advance, that I couldn't just abandon my other customers. But Mr. Romano overheard and, trying to be helpful, rearranged things to accommodate them. What followed was 3 hours of pure humiliation. I served them course after course, while they made endless jokes at my expense. "Hey, sis, the water's a bit warm. Don't they teach you proper serving temperature in waitress school?" Riley snickered. "Molly, dear, you missed a spot when you wiped the table." "Maybe that's why you're still just a server," Mom chimed in, while his friends laughed. By the time they finished their elaborate meal, complete with expensive wines and multiple courses, I was exhausted and emotionally drained. But the worst was yet to come. As they gathered their coats, Mom pulled me aside with that fake sweet smile I'd grown to dread. "Darling, there's just one tiny thing," she said, lowering her voice. "We're a bit short on cash right now. You'll need to cover the bill. Consider it your gift to your brother for his birthday." I stared at the bill in my hand, $247.83. Nearly half my weekly salary. "You can't be serious," I whispered. "You came here knowing you couldn't pay?" "Don't be dramatic, Molly," she hissed. "It's your brother's birthday. Surely you want to do something nice for him? Besides, you get an employee discount, don't you?" They all stood there, watching me, Riley twirling his new car keys, while Mom gave me that expectant look that said I had no choice. And she was right, I couldn't let them walk out without paying. It would cost me my job. 6 months after Riley's extravagant birthday celebration, my own birthday rolled around. That morning, Mom was unusually chipper. "Don't make any plans for tonight, sweetie," she sang out as I headed to work. "We have a special surprise waiting for you when you get home." For the first time in years, I actually felt hopeful. Maybe they'd finally realized how unfairly they'd been treating me. Maybe they'd finally show me the same kind of appreciation they showed Riley. I spent my entire shift daydreaming about what might be waiting for me, maybe a nice family dinner, perhaps even something special they'd saved up for. I practically rushed home after my shift ended, my heart beating faster as I opened the front door. But what I saw stopped me dead in my tracks. There stood my family, dressed to the nines, Mom in a brand new designer dress that must have cost at least $400, matching shoes that I recognized from the expensive boutique downtown, and Dad and Riley in crisp new suits that definitely weren't from the discount store. "Happy birthday," they chorused, but all I could see was the money they were wearing, my money. "Here's your gift, sis," Riley smirked, tossing a small package at me. With trembling hands, I opened it to find a perfume box. But something was off. The designer name was misspelled, Gucci, instead of Gucci. The label was crooked, clearly stuck on by hand, and when I sprayed a tiny bit, the chemical smell was so overwhelming it made my eyes water. That was the moment something inside me snapped. "Are you kidding me?" My voice started low, but quickly rose to a shout. "Molly," Mom looked shocked. "Don't be ungrateful." "Ungrateful?" I was screaming now, years of pent-up frustration pouring out. "I pay all the bills in this house. I buy the groceries. I give you expensive gifts for every holiday." "Keep your voice down," Dad muttered, but I was beyond stopping. "You bought Riley a car with my money. I'm still paying for his gas, and he won't even give me a ride to work. I've asked him 3 times, and each time he said he was too busy playing video games." Riley shifted uncomfortably. "It's not my fault you can't afford your own car. Because I spend all my money on this family." I grabbed at my hair in frustration. "And what do I get for my birthday? Fake perfume that smells like paint thinner while you're all standing there in clothes that cost more than I make in 2 weeks. You're being hysterical," Mom snapped. "This is no way to act on your birthday." "Hysterical? You want to see hysterical?" I snatched up the perfume bottle. "This isn't even real. You couldn't even be bothered to get me something that wasn't a cheap knockoff." "That's enough," Dad's voice boomed. "If you're going to act like this, you can just go to your room and stay there." "Yes," Mom added, smoothing her expensive dress. "Go celebrate alone until you can behave properly and show some gratitude." I turned and walked to my room without another word, but this time was different. This time I wasn't going to cry. This time I was going to plan. Because in that moment, I knew with absolute certainty that I needed to get out of this house. Just a week after my disastrous birthday, Mr. Romano called me into his office. I was nervous at first, wondering if my family's behavior during Riley's birthday dinner had finally caught up with me. "Molly," he said, gesturing for me to sit down, "I've been watching your work here for a long time. You're reliable, professional, and our customers love you. How would you feel about becoming our new receptionist? The position comes with a significant pay raise, of course. What do you say?" I nearly cried right there in his office. Yes, absolutely yes. That very afternoon, during my break, I started searching for apartments. With my new salary, I could finally afford to live on my own. It felt like the universe was finally giving me a chance to escape. By some miracle, I found a small one-bedroom apartment just 3 blocks from the restaurant. It wasn't fancy, just a basic kitchen, living room, and bedroom, but it was clean, safe, and most importantly, it was away from my family. The landlord, Mrs. Chen, took one look at my proof of employment from Giovanni's and approved me on the spot. "You seem like a responsible young lady," she said as I signed the lease. "When would you like to move in?" "Tomorrow, if possible," I replied, my hands shaking with excitement as I wrote the check for the deposit. That evening at dinner, while Mom was serving her usual microwaved meals, I decided to drop my bomb. "I'm moving out tomorrow," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I've found an apartment near work." Mom's face turned an alarming shade of red. "How dare you? How are we supposed to pay our bills? Have you even thought about that? You're being completely selfish." I took a deep breath. Dad has a job. And Riley's perfectly capable of working. Maybe it's time he started contributing. "I have devoted my entire life to you children." Mom was in full meltdown mode now, tears streaming down her face. "And this is how you repay me? By abandoning your family when we need you most?" Riley just sat there, shoving food in his mouth and watching the show like it was another one of his video games. Dad stared at his plate, silent as always. "I've heard enough," I said, standing up from the table. "I'm leaving tomorrow, and that's final." "You ungrateful little," Mom's voice followed me up the stairs, but I tuned it out. I spent the next hour packing my belongings into the few boxes and bags I'd secretly bought over the past week. It wasn't much, some clothes, a few books, my laptop, and the small amount of jewelry I owned. My whole life fit into 4 boxes and 2 duffel bags. When the taxi arrived, I didn't say goodbye. I just walked out the front door, to the sound of Mom's continued screaming about family loyalty and ungrateful children. As the taxi pulled away, I caught one last glimpse of our house in the rearview mirror, and for the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. The first month in my new apartment was pure bliss. No drama, no guilt trips, no watching Riley being waited on hand and foot. Just peace and quiet. I could cook what I wanted, watch what I wanted, and most importantly, spend my money how I wanted. Then came the phone call. "Molly," Mom's voice was sharp even through the phone. "The utility bills are due." I took a deep breath. "Mom, I don't live there anymore. I'm not responsible for those bills." "We were counting on that money," she screeched. "You have an obligation to help your family." "No, Mom, I don't. Riley's had a whole month to find a job. He can help now. Your brother can't find work right now. And he needs money, he crashed the car last week and needs repairs. He can't work without a car." I almost laughed at the irony. "So he crashed the car you bought with my money, and now you want more of my money to fix it?" Not happening. This isn't my problem anymore. The next 6 months were transformative. Without having to support my entire family, I was finally able to save money. I bought myself a used Toyota, nothing fancy, but it was mine, paid for with my own money. No strings attached, no guilt, no obligations. I felt like I could finally breathe. Then one evening, there was a knock at my door. I opened it to find my parents standing there. My stomach dropped. I had never told them my address. "We need to talk," Mom said, pushing past me into my apartment. Dad followed, looking uncomfortable as usual. "We need money, Molly. Your father's about to be laid off, and Riley still hasn't found work. You have to help us." "No," I said firmly. "I don't have to do anything. We're your family." Mom's voice was rising. "You can't just abandon us." "I'm not abandoning anyone. I'm just not enabling you anymore." Dad finally spoke up. "The mine's cutting back workers. I might not have a job by next month." "Then Riley needs to step up," I replied. "He's had plenty of time to find work." "Fine," Mom's face twisted into something ugly. "If that's how you want to play it, then you'll have problems too." My mother's throat wasn't empty. The very next morning, I woke up to Mrs. Chen frantically banging on my door. "Molly, your car. Someone set it on fire." I ran outside in my pajamas to find my Toyota, my pride and joy that I'd worked so hard for, reduced to a smoking shell in the parking lot. My legs nearly gave out, but then Mrs. Chen grabbed my arm. "I have cameras," she said quickly. "The police are on their way. We caught everything on video." The footage was crystal clear. There was Riley, at 3 a.m., pouring something over my car and lighting a match. He hadn't noticed the security cameras tucked away in the building's eaves, hadn't even thought to look for them. He just did his work quickly and walked away as my car went up in flames, probably thinking he'd never be caught. The police arrested him within hours. My phone started ringing almost immediately. "You have to drop the charges." Mom was hysterical. "He's your brother. You can't let them take him to jail." "Actually, I can," I replied, surprising myself with how calm I felt. "But I'll make you a deal, reimburse me for the car, and I'll withdraw my statement." "We don't have that kind of money." "You know that." "Then Riley can face the consequences of his actions. For once in his life." "You heartless little," I hung up before she could finish. The trial was quick. The evidence was undeniable, and Riley had priors I hadn't even known about. Apparently, he'd been in trouble for vandalism before, but my parents had always managed to sweep it under the rug. This time, there was no sweeping. He got 3 years and was ordered to pay restitution equal to the value of my car. My parents eventually took out a loan to pay me back, probably hoping I'd drop the charges if they did. But it was too late. Riley had already been sentenced. He served a year and a half before getting out on good behavior, though I only heard this through distant relatives who occasionally update me on family gossip. They tell me my parents still live in the same house, struggling more than ever. Dad's health is failing, but he keeps working at the mine because he has to. Mom spends her days lamenting about her poor boy whose life was ruined by his sister. Riley, unsurprisingly, still doesn't have a job. Turns out having an arson conviction makes it even harder to find that prestigious position he always thought he deserved. Sometimes, friends ask me if I feel guilty. If maybe I was too harsh. They ask if I ever think about reaching out, trying to mend fences. Would you give a second chance to someone who tried to destroy everything you worked for? I ask them back. Would you trust people who watched you struggle for years while they spoiled someone else? The truth is, I don't regret any of it. My family made their choices, years and years of choices, and now they're living with the consequences. They chose to enable Riley's laziness and entitlement. They chose to treat me like their personal ATM. They chose to threaten me when I stopped playing along. And finally, Riley chose to commit a crime, thinking he'd get away with it like he got away with everything else. I'm done feeling guilty about their choices. These days, my life is peaceful. I still live in the same apartment. Mrs. Chen actually reduced my rent after the incident, saying she'd never had such a good tenant. I'm still working at Giovanni's, but now I'm the head receptionist. I've been saving money again. Not for another car, though I did eventually get one, with better insurance this time, but for something bigger. Next fall, I'm starting college, part-time at first, but it's a start. I'm going to study business management. Maybe someday I'll open my own restaurant. My earliest memories aren't of bedtime stories or family picnics, they're of screaming matches and slammed doors. I'm Elsie, and for the first 8 years of my life, I watched my parents' marriage crumble one fight at a time. Dad always found something wrong with everything Mom did. The dinner was too salty. The laundry wasn't folded right. She spent too much money at the grocery store. She was teaching me bad habits. It didn't matter what she did, it was never good enough for him. "You're completely useless, Sarah," he would shout, his face red with anger. "Can't you do anything right?" I would hide in my room during these fights, pressing my hands against my ears, but their voices always found their way through the walls. After each fight, I'd hear Mom crying in the bathroom, trying to muffle her sobs with running water. The pattern continued year after year. Some days were better than others, but the tension was always there, like a storm waiting to break. Dad worked as a successful corporate lawyer, and he wielded his professional authority at home like a weapon. Mom was a stay-at-home mother who had given up her teaching career when I was born, something Dad never let her forget. "I provide everything for this family," he'd remind her during their arguments. "The least you could do is run a proper household." My 8th birthday was surprisingly peaceful. Dad even smiled a few times, and Mom made my favorite chocolate cake. Looking back now, I realize Mom must have already made her decision by then. The next morning, she was gone. No note, no goodbye, no explanation. Just empty drawers and a half-empty closet. Dad went ballistic, calling everyone we knew, hiring private investigators, but she had vanished completely. When the divorce proceedings started, she didn't show up to court. The judge granted Dad full custody and terminated her parental rights. I remember sitting in that courtroom, wearing the blue dress Mom had bought me just a month before, wondering if she would suddenly appear and explain everything. But she never did. Dad gripped my hand so tightly it hurt as we left the courthouse. "She's a traitor," he spat, his jaw clenched. "We don't need her. We never needed her." But I did need her. I needed my mom to protect me from Dad's temper, to braid my hair in the mornings, to tell me everything would be okay. Instead, I was left alone with a father whose anger now had no other target but me. That's when Dad decided to hire a nanny. "I can't work and take care of a child," he announced one evening. "We need help around here." Enter Maria Chen, young, pretty, and at first, seemingly perfect. She was 26, had a degree in early childhood education, and made the best chocolate chip cookies I'd ever tasted. When she started working for us, I thought things might finally get better. At first, I didn't understand what was happening. Dad and Maria would exchange these weird little smiles when they thought I wasn't looking. Sometimes I'd walk into a room and they'd suddenly stop talking, like teenagers caught passing notes in class. Maria started staying later and later after Dad got home from work, and they'd sit in the kitchen talking in low voices. One evening in October, about 6 months after Maria started working for us, Dad called me into his study. Maria was there too, standing next to his desk with this huge smile on her face. "Elsie," Dad said, actually looking happy for the first time since Mom left, "I have something important to tell you. Maria and I are getting married." I remember feeling relieved, honestly. Maria had been so good to me. She helped me with my homework, made my favorite pasta dishes, and never yelled like Dad did. When I had nightmares, she'd sit with me and tell me stories until I fell back asleep. Maybe this was our chance at being a real family again. "That's great," I said, and I meant it. Maria hugged me, and her perfume smelled like vanilla and flowers. "We'll be so happy together," she promised. "You'll see." The wedding was small but elegant. I was the flower girl, wearing a pink dress that Maria helped me pick out. She looked beautiful in her white gown, and Dad couldn't stop smiling. That was the last day I saw the Maria I knew. It started small. The day after they got back from their honeymoon, I left my backpack in the living room like I always did. Maria walked in, saw it, and her whole face changed. "Pick that up immediately," she snapped. "This isn't a pigsty." I was shocked. Maria had never spoken to me like that before. But that was just the beginning. Suddenly, everything I did was wrong. My bed wasn't made properly. I was too loud when I walked. I didn't say please and thank you enough times. One day, confused and hurt by her complete transformation, I worked up the courage to ask her directly, "Why are you so different now? You used to be so nice to me." Maria laughed, not the warm laugh I remembered, but something cold and sharp. "Oh, sweetie," she said, examining her perfectly manicured nails. "Before, I was just an employee. Now I'm the lady of this house, and you need to learn your place. When I tell you to do something, you do it. No questions asked." I ran to Dad's study that evening, tears streaming down my face, and told him everything. I thought he would protect me, set things right. Instead, his face turned that dangerous shade of red I remembered from his fights with Mom. "You're just like your mother," he snarled, slamming his hand on the desk. "Always complaining, always causing problems. Let me make something very clear. If I hear you saying one more word against Maria to anyone, you'll be very, very sorry. Do you understand me?" I nodded, my whole body shaking, and fled to my room. That night, I cried into my pillow until it was soaked through, wishing desperately for Mom to come back and save me. Life became a minefield of new rules and restrictions. Maria wielded her authority like a weapon, finding new ways to make my life miserable every day. First, she banned my favorite pop music because it was too vulgar. Then she took away the small TV in my room, claiming it was distracting me from my studies, even though I had straight A's. She started controlling what I wore, throwing out my favorite jeans because they were too casual. My colorful bedspread was replaced with plain white sheets because my room needed to match the house aesthetic. She even scheduled my shower times, no longer than 10 minutes, and only at specific hours she approved. The only light in this darkness was Grandma Helen, Mom's mother. She visited every few weeks, always bringing me something special: books, clothes, or little pieces of jewelry that Maria couldn't justify taking away because they were family gifts. "How are you doing, sweetheart?" Grandma would ask during her visits, her eyes searching my face for the truth. I'd feel Dad's and Maria's eyes on me, remember Dad's threat, and force a smile. "I'm fine, Grandma, everything's great." This went on for 3 years. I learned to live by Maria's rules, to stay quiet, to be invisible. Then, when I was 13, Maria announced she was pregnant. Dad was ecstatic. He started converting the guest room into a nursery before she was even showing. Maria spent hours looking at baby clothes and designing the perfect room for their precious daughter. When little Sophie was born, it was like I ceased to exist entirely. Dad took photos of everything she did: her first smile, her first attempt to roll over, her first grab at a toy. Maria posted hourly updates on social media about her perfect little angel. But 6 months into their parental bliss, Maria started complaining. "I'm so exhausted," she'd whine to Dad. "The baby needs constant attention. I can't even get my nails done anymore." Dad, ever the problem solver, suggested hiring a babysitter. "There are plenty of qualified college students looking for work," he said one evening over dinner. "We could interview some." I watched Maria's face twist into a grimace at the mention of college students. Her hand tightened around her fork, and I could practically read her thoughts. After all, wasn't that exactly how she'd gotten her position in this house? A young, pretty student nanny who ended up becoming the wife? The irony wasn't lost on me, even at 13. "Absolutely not," Maria cut him off, her fork clattering against her plate. Her eyes narrowed as she looked at me across the table. "We don't need to hire anyone. We have a perfectly capable babysitter right here." Dad followed her gaze and nodded slowly. "You're right. Elsie can help out with Sophie. It'll be good for her to learn some responsibility." What started as helping out quickly turned into full-time, unpaid childcare. Every day after school, Maria would be waiting by the door, Sophie already in her arms. The moment I stepped inside, she'd practically throw the baby at me. "She's been fed, but she'll need changing soon," Maria would say, already grabbing her designer purse. "I have an appointment at the salon," or "I'm meeting the girls for coffee," or whatever excuse she had that day. I loved Sophie. She was an innocent baby who didn't deserve to be caught in the middle of all this. But I was 14, trying to maintain my grades while essentially becoming a full-time nanny. Instead of doing my algebra homework, I was warming bottles and making baby food. Rather than working on my history project, I was changing diapers and singing lullabies. Maria would breeze in around 6:30, just before Dad got home, carrying takeout containers from expensive restaurants. "I'm exhausted from cooking all day," she'd announce as Dad walked in, setting the food on the table. I'd be there, still in my school uniform, Sophie on my hip, homework untouched. One day at school, I couldn't take it anymore. During lunch, I broke down and told my friend Amanda everything, about being forced to watch Sophie every day, about not having time for homework, about Maria's lies to Dad. "That's not right," Amanda said, her face serious. "My mom works for Child Protective Services. This is exactly the kind of thing she deals with. I should have known better than to trust anyone." 2 days later, I was home with Sophie, trying to simultaneously feed her strained peas and read my English assignment, when there was a knock at the door. 3 people in professional attire introduced themselves as representatives from CPS. They asked where Maria was. I told the truth, at her weekly spa appointment. They looked around the house, took notes, asked me questions about my daily routine. Then they called my father. Dad arrived 20 minutes later, his face a mask of calm that didn't reach his eyes. I knew that look. It was the same one he used to wear before his worst fights with Mom. The CPS workers explained their concerns about leaving a 14-year-old in charge of an infant for extended periods. They issued a formal warning about negligent supervision and left their card. The moment their car pulled away, Dad exploded. "You treacherous little snake," he roared, his face purple with rage. "Just like your mother, always trying to destroy this family. Do you have any idea what you've done?" "I didn't mean to," I started, but he cut me off. "Shut up. You're exactly like her, a traitor. You betrayed this family, betrayed Maria's trust." Maria came home then, her hair freshly styled, nails gleaming. Dad told her everything, but remarkably, his anger never touched her. Instead, she burst into tears, claiming I was trying to ruin her life, that I was jealous of her relationship with Sophie, that I was ungrateful for everything they'd done for me. "Go to your room," Dad bellowed. "No phone, no computer, no leaving the house except for school for the next month. And if you ever pull something like this again." He didn't finish the threat. He didn't need to. A week after the CPS incident, I waited until Dad and Maria were asleep, then crept downstairs with my phone that they'd forgotten to take away. My hands were shaking as I dialed Grandma Helen's number. "Grandma?" I whispered when she answered. "I need help." My voice broke as I told her everything, the forced babysitting, the neglect, Dad's rage, the punishment. She listened quietly, only occasionally making soft sounds of distress. "I'll be there tomorrow morning," she said firmly. "Pack a bag, sweetheart, just in case." True to her word, Grandma Helen arrived at 9 a.m. sharp the next day. She wasn't her usual diplomatic self. She stormed into the house like an avenging angel, her normally perfect hair slightly disheveled, her eyes blazing. "I've watched this situation long enough," she announced to Dad and Maria in our living room. "I know everything, how you've turned my granddaughter into an unpaid servant, how you've been neglecting her education, how you punish her for speaking the truth." Dad started to protest, but Grandma cut him off. "I'm taking Elsie to live with me. You can either agree to this amicably, or we can let a judge decide after I show them the evidence I've been collecting." "You can't just take her," Dad spluttered, but I noticed Maria's expression shift. She touched Dad's arm gently. Maybe, she said softly, maybe it would be better for everyone. We could focus on Sophie, and Elsie would have more opportunities with Helen. I could see the wheels turning in Dad's head as Maria continued to whisper persuasively in his ear. Within an hour, he agreed to let me go. Grandma's house, or rather, mansion, was like something out of a dream. Located in the wealthy part of town, it had a sweeping driveway, manicured gardens, and more rooms than I could count. My bedroom was bigger than our entire living room at Dad's house, with a window seat overlooking the rose garden. "This is your home now," Grandma said, helping me unpack. "You can decorate it however you like." I transferred to Winchester Prep, where I quickly made real friends for the first time in years. No one there knew my history, and I could just be myself, not the unwanted stepdaughter, not the unpaid babysitter, just Elsie. On my 16th birthday, Grandma called me into her study. She was sitting behind her antique desk, looking more serious than usual. "I've set up a college fund for you," she announced. "It should cover tuition at any university you choose, Harvard, Yale, Stanford, wherever you want to go." That night, I stayed up late studying for my AP biology test. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just studying to escape my reality, I was studying for my future. I found the photo album by accident while helping Grandma reorganize her office a month after the conversation about college. It was leather-bound, tucked away on a high shelf, behind some financial records. When I opened it, my mother's face stared back at me, younger, happier, in pictures I'd never seen before. My heart started racing as I flipped through the pages. There she was at my age, then at her high school graduation, then at what looked like her college years. She looked so much like me, it was startling. The same dark hair, the same smile, even the same way of tilting her head in photos. "Grandma," I called out, my voice trembling with sudden hope. "Look what I found." Grandma came into the office and froze when she saw what I was holding. "We should contact her," I said, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. "Now that I'm living with you, Dad can't stop her from seeing me anymore. She doesn't have to be afraid of him. We could." "Elsie," Grandma interrupted softly, and something in her tone made my stomach drop. "There's something you need to know." She walked to her desk and opened her laptop, clicking through folders until she found what she was looking for. "I should have told you this sooner, but I was trying to protect you." "Protect me from what?" Grandma took a deep breath. "The day after your mother left, I emailed her. I knew where she was, she'd contacted me briefly before leaving. I told her she needed to come back for you, that she couldn't leave you with your father. I promised to help her financially, to support both of you, to do whatever was necessary to keep you both safe." My hands were shaking now. What did she say?" Instead of answering, Grandma turned the laptop toward me. The email was dated one day after Mom left, and it was short. "Mom, don't contact me about Elsie again. I don't want her. I never have. I never loved her, she was just a chain keeping me tied to that house, to that life. I don't care what happens to her. She's Robert's problem now. Sarah." The words blurred as tears filled my eyes. I read it again, and again, trying to make them say something different. But they remained the same, cold, cruel, final. "I saved it," Grandma said quietly. "I thought someday you might need to know the truth." I closed the photo album slowly, my mother's smiling face suddenly seeming like a mockery. All these years, I'd imagined her forced away by Dad's cruelty, too afraid to contact me, perhaps watching me from afar and loving me in secret. But the truth was simpler and far more brutal, she'd never wanted me at all. The next 2 years were the happiest of my life. I got accepted to Princeton with a perfect GPA and spent my weekdays immersed in my studies, making new friends, and building a life for myself. Every weekend, I'd call Grandma Helen, and during holidays and vacations, I'd return home to her. "Tell me everything," she'd say as we shared tea in her garden, and I'd talk for hours about my classes, my friends, my dreams for the future. Then, halfway through my sophomore year, Grandma got sick. It started with what seemed like a simple cold, but quickly turned into something much worse. The doctors discovered stage 4 lung cancer, already spread throughout her body. They gave her 6 months. She fought hard, never losing her dignity or her sharp wit, but the doctors were right. I spent that summer break by her bedside, watching her slip away. She died on a quiet Tuesday morning in August, holding my hand and telling me how proud she was of me. The funeral was well attended. Grandma Helen had been a pillar of the community, and people came from all over to pay their respects. Business associates, charity board members, friends from her social clubs, distant relatives I barely knew, they all came to say goodbye. But 3 people were conspicuously absent: my mother, my father, and Maria. Not that I expected them to come, but their absence felt like one final confirmation of how completely they'd cut themselves out of our lives. 2 weeks after the funeral, I received a call from Mr. Patterson, Grandma's notary, asking me to come to his office for the reading of the will. When I arrived, I found someone I hadn't seen in over a decade: my mother. She was with a man who looked about 5 years younger than her, dressed in an expensive but ill-fitting suit. She barely glanced at me when I walked in, though I caught her checking her watch repeatedly as she urged Mr. Patterson to get on with it. The reading itself was brief but devastating, at least for her. Grandma had left me her house, all her jewelry, and the bulk of her fortune, $700,000. My mother received $100,000 and nothing else. This can't be right, my mother burst out, her composure finally cracking. Tears streamed down her face, smearing her perfect makeup. I'm her daughter. I have debts to pay. I need that money. The younger man with her shifted uncomfortably in his chair as she continued to sob and plead, claiming she was entitled to more, that it wasn't fair, that she needed help. I stood up without a word and walked out, her cries following me down the hallway. The next morning, I was in Grandma's study, my study now, sorting through decades of documents. The doorbell rang around noon. When I opened the door, my mother stood there, wearing a different designer outfit than yesterday, but the same desperate expression. She walked past me into the foyer, her eyes drinking in every detail of the house. Oh, it's exactly as I remember it. I grew up here, you know. That chip in the marble by the stairs? That's from when I was 7 and dropped my roller skates. Why are you here? I asked, closing the door but not moving from it. She ran her hand along the banister. I miss this place, miss you. We have so much catching up to do, don't you think? Mother and daughter, finally reunited. I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. 12 years. It took you 12 years to miss me? I know I made mistakes, she said, her voice taking on a pleading tone. I was young, trapped in a horrible marriage with your father. I wasn't thinking clearly. She moved into the living room, settling onto the couch as if she belonged there. Actually, sweetie, I was hoping we could help each other out. I'm in a bit of a financial bind right now, and this house is so big for just one person. No, I said firmly. You can't live here. Not now, not ever. Her face changed then, the mask of maternal affection slipping. I'm your mother, Elsie, you can't just throw me out on the street. I gave birth to you. And then you abandoned me, I replied, my voice steady. You left me with a father you knew was toxic. You never called, never wrote, never checked if I was okay. She paled slightly but recovered quickly. You don't understand how complicated adult relationships are. If you turn your back on me now, I'll make sure everyone knows what a cruel, heartless daughter you are. I'll tell them how you're leaving your own mother homeless. I walked to the study, retrieved my laptop, and returned. Go ahead, tell everyone. And I'll show them this. I opened the saved email, the one Grandma had kept all these years. I don't want her. I never have. I never loved her, I read aloud. She's Robert's problem now. Should I forward this to all those society friends you're so worried about? Post it on social media maybe? The color drained from her face completely. She stood up, grabbing her designer purse. You're just like your father, cruel and manipulative. No, I said calmly. I'm like my grandmother, I see through your act, and I keep receipts. She fled the house in a rage, the door slamming behind her. That was 6 months ago. I'm graduating from Princeton next month, with honors in business administration. I've already accepted a job offer at a consulting firm in town, and in July, I'll move back into Grandma's house permanently. My house now. Dad tried to call once, probably after hearing about the inheritance from my mother. I didn't answer. Maria still posts perfect family photos with Sophie on social media. I blocked her account. My mother occasionally sends manipulative texts about forgiveness and family obligations. I blocked her number too. Some people say you can't choose your family, but I disagree. Grandma chose me when my own parents wouldn't, and that's the legacy I'm choosing to honor. I'm having the house renovated next month, updating it while keeping all the things that made it special to Grandma. Yesterday, I found a letter Grandma had written to me before she died, tucked away in her desk drawer. Remember, she wrote, your worth isn't determined by those who left, but by how you choose to move forward. You are stronger than you know, smarter than you believe, and more loved than you can imagine. She was right. The past is the past, and I'm done letting it define my future. My name is Ashley, and I never thought my life would change so dramatically in just 1 year. Looking back now, I can't help but laugh at how naive I was about what I thought was my perfect marriage. 4 years ago, at age 30, I married Robert. We seemed like the perfect match. I was climbing the corporate ladder as a project manager at Richardson Financial, while he was content with his position as a manager at TradeWorks. Unlike many of my colleagues' husbands who were constantly chasing promotions, Robert preferred a simpler life. He'd come home early, cook dinner, and we'd spend quiet evenings together. I earned more than him, but it never seemed to bother him. In fact, he seemed to enjoy having a successful wife. Honey, I made your favorite pasta tonight, he'd say almost every Friday, greeting me with a kiss as I walked through the door, exhausted from another long week of meetings and deadlines. You spoil me too much, I'd reply, breathing in the familiar scent of garlic and herbs that filled our rented house. We had our routines, our inside jokes, our shared dreams. We were saving for our own place, and the joint account kept growing steadily. We had already saved $200,000, not enough for our dream home yet, but we were getting there. We'll have our own place soon, Robert would say, scrolling through real estate listings on his phone while we cuddled on the couch. Just another year or two of saving. I'd nod, imagining our future together. We talked about having kids someday, but we both agreed to wait until we had our own place. Everything seemed so clear, so certain. Then came that Tuesday in March. I remember it perfectly because it was the day everything started to unravel, though I didn't know it yet. I was in the middle of presenting quarterly projections to the board when the room started spinning. The faces around the conference table blurred, and the last thing I heard was someone shouting my name before everything went black. I woke up in the emergency room, surrounded by concerned faces and the steady beep of monitors. A doctor with kind eyes and graying hair was standing by my bed, holding a clipboard. Mrs. Parker, he said gently, we need to run some additional tests, but the preliminary scan shows something concerning. There appears to be a mass in your brain. The word mass echoed in my head like a death sentence. I felt my world tilting again, but this time I remained conscious, painfully aware of every word that followed. We'll need to do more extensive testing to determine if it's benign and if surgery is possible, the doctor continued. I need to be honest with you, even if surgery is an option, there's a significant risk of long-term disability. I nodded mechanically, my mind already racing to Robert. How would he take this news? Would he stay by my side if I became disabled? We had promised in sickness and in health, but this was different. This was real. I took a cab home from the hospital that evening, my mind racing with how to break the news to Robert. When I opened our front door, I found him in the kitchen, humming while stirring something that smelled like beef stew. The normalcy of it all made my heart ache. Robert, I called out softly, still standing in the doorway. I need to tell you something. He turned around, wooden spoon in hand, and must have seen something in my face, because the smile immediately dropped from his. What's wrong, Ash? I told him everything, the fainting spell, the hospital, the tumor. His face grew increasingly pale as I spoke, but what happened next caught me completely off guard. Will you be able to keep working? He asked, setting down the spoon. What happens if you have to quit? Do we have enough money? I stood there, stunned. My husband had just learned I might be dying or face permanent disability, and his first concern was about money? About my ability to work? We have our savings, I managed to reply, trying to keep the hurt from my voice. It should be enough to get us through the initial period. We can figure out the rest later. Right, he nodded, running his hands through his hair. The savings. Okay. The next few weeks were a blur of doctor's appointments and tests. I tried to maintain my normal work schedule, but it became increasingly difficult. The headaches were getting worse, and some days I could barely focus on my computer screen. Ashley, you need to take some time off, my boss, Sarah Mitchell, finally said after finding me with my head in my hands one afternoon. We can arrange for 6 months of medical leave. Your health has to come first. I knew she was right, but being at home all day was harder than I expected. The walls seemed to close in on me as I lay on the couch, wondering if each day might be one of my last. Would I die? Would I survive but never be the same? The questions tormented me endlessly. And then there was Robert's changing behavior. He started coming home later and later, sometimes well past midnight. When I asked him about it, he'd always have the same response. I'm picking up extra shifts, Ash. We need the money for your treatment. You understand, right? I'd nod, too exhausted from my own fears to probe further. Sometimes I'd hear him on the phone in another room, speaking in hushed tones, but I told myself he was probably just dealing with work stuff. My mind was occupied with darker thoughts. What would happen if the tumor was malignant? If I survived but ended up paralyzed? Would Robert stick around to take care of a disabled wife? After weeks of trying to handle everything on my own, I finally broke down and called my mother. I'd been avoiding it, not wanting to worry her at her age. She'd had me late in life and was now in her 70s. But I needed her, more than I'd ever needed her before. Mom, I said when she answered the phone, my voice cracking. I'm sick. As soon as I explained everything, she didn't hesitate. I'm coming over right now, sweetheart. Pack my bag this minute. She arrived the next day. I was having one of my bad days, barely able to make it from the bedroom to the bathroom without getting dizzy. She took one look at me and switched into full mother mode, just like when I was a little girl with the flu. Having Mom there was like being wrapped in a warm blanket. She cooked, cleaned, made sure I took my medications on time, and most importantly, held my hand during the worst moments when the fear became overwhelming. But not everyone was happy about her presence. Robert's face would tighten every time he came home and found her there. He'd force a smile and retreat to the bedroom, or suddenly remember work emails he had to send. Your mother doesn't have to stay here all the time, he said one night when we were alone. I can take care of you. But you're hardly ever home anymore, I pointed out. Because I'm working, he snapped, then immediately softened his tone. I'm working for us, Ash. Mom noticed the tension too. After 2 weeks, she announced she was heading home. You seem stronger now, sweetheart, she said, though I could tell she was reluctant to leave. But I'm just a phone call away if you need me. The next few weeks were a blur of medical tests and clinic visits. The house felt empty without Mom, and Robert was spending even more time away. But I forced myself to focus on my health, on getting through each day, on hoping for good news. Then finally, after what felt like an eternity, I got it. At my latest appointment, my doctor was actually smiling as he looked at my test results. Mrs. Parker, I have good news, he said, and I felt my heart skip a beat. The tumor is benign, and it's in a location where we can safely operate. The risk of complications is minimal. I burst into tears of relief. After all these weeks of uncertainty and fear, there was hope. Real hope. I couldn't wait to tell Robert. Maybe now things could go back to normal. Maybe all his strange behavior had just been stress about my condition. I practically floated out of the hospital, already planning how I would tell him the good news. I decided to head straight home, hoping to catch him before he left for work. I quietly inserted my key into the lock, but before I could open the door fully, I heard his voice from inside. He was talking loudly on the phone, apparently not expecting anyone home at this hour. "I can't take it anymore, Sarah. You don't know what it's like living with her," he was saying, his voice filled with disgust. "The constant smell of medicines in the house, her sickly appearance, it's just unbearable." My hand froze on the doorknob as he continued. I know. But you should see her now, she's nothing like the woman I married. Always weak, always complaining about headaches. I'm too young to be playing nurse to an invalid." Each word felt like a physical blow. I stood there, listening to my husband disparage me to another woman, my legs trembling beneath me. "Yeah, the money situation is being handled. We've got quite a bit in savings. Look, I'll figure something out. I just need to get out of this situation before she gets worse." I pushed the door open fully and stepped into the room. Robert spun around, the phone still pressed to his ear, his face draining of color when he saw me. "I'll call you back," he mumbled into the phone, ending the call. What was that all about? My voice came out steadier than I expected. For a moment, Robert just stared at me, caught off guard. Then his expression shifted, hardened. "Well, I guess you heard everything," he said, straightening his shoulders. "Maybe it's better this way. We need to talk." "Talk about what?" I asked, though I already knew what was coming. "I want a divorce, Ashley. And I want half of our savings." He said it so matter-of-factly, like he was discussing the weather. "Let's be realistic, you're sick, and I'm not going to spend the best years of my life taking care of an invalid. I need someone young, healthy. I deserve that." I stood there, absorbing his words, thinking about the good news I'd just received from the doctor. But looking at Robert now, I realized it wouldn't make any difference. This wasn't about my illness, it was about who he really was. "We need to do this quickly," he continued, gaining confidence from my silence. "Before your surgery. I'm not risking being legally tied to a disabled person if something goes wrong." "Fine," I said quietly. "I agree to the divorce." He seemed surprised by my quick agreement, perhaps expecting tears or pleading. "Good," he said, recovering quickly. "I'll go to a hotel tonight. I don't want to stay here anymore. I'll come back tomorrow to pack my things." "That's probably best," I replied, my voice hollow. Robert grabbed his jacket and wallet, not even bothering to pack an overnight bag. At the door, he paused for a moment, like he might say something else, then shook his head and left. After Robert left, I stood in our living room for what felt like hours, letting the reality of what had just happened sink in. Finally, I decided to start packing his things. I couldn't bear the thought of seeing him again tomorrow. As I moved around the house gathering his belongings, my eyes fell on his laptop, still open on the dining room table. I'd never been the type to snoop through my husband's things, but something compelled me to look at the screen. What I found made my knees buckle, and I had to grab the back of a chair for support. There, in full view, was a series of intimate messages between Robert and Sarah. As I scrolled through their conversation history, my stomach turned. There were explicit photos, intimate details of their encounters, and worst of all, cruel jokes about me. "Poor sick Ashley," Sarah had written. "At least her condition gives us more time together." "God, you should see her now," Robert had replied. "She looks like death warmed over. I can barely stand to look at her anymore." My hands were shaking as I continued scrolling, but what I found next made me gasp out loud. There was another conversation thread, this one with Amanda Wilson, my husband's boss's wife. The messages between them were equally intimate, filled with declarations of love and plans for secret meetings. "Does your husband suspect anything?" Robert had asked her. "John's clueless as always," she'd replied. "Too busy with work to notice what's happening under his nose." I felt sick, but I forced myself to keep reading. With trembling hands, I grabbed my phone and started taking pictures of everything, the messages, the photos, the timestamps. Something in me knew this might be important later. The divorce proceedings moved quickly after that. We didn't have much to untangle, no children, no property of our own. The house was rented, and our only joint asset was our savings account with the $200,000 we'd been saving for a down payment on a house. Money that had come primarily from my higher salary, though I'd never minded that imbalance before. Robert's lawyer, a shark in an expensive suit, had other ideas. "Your Honor," he argued during the proceedings, "while Mrs. Parker may have contributed more directly to the savings account, my client's contributions to the household were equally valuable. He managed all domestic duties, allowing Mrs. Parker to focus on her career. The money he earned went directly to household expenses, groceries, utilities, daily necessities." I watched as Robert nodded solemnly beside his lawyer, playing the role of the devoted house husband who'd sacrificed his own career advancement for our home. The same man who'd called me a burden just weeks before. The judge agreed with their argument. "The court finds that both parties contributed equally to the marriage, albeit in different ways. The savings will be divided equally between Mr. and Mrs. Parker." Just like that, half of our savings, $100,000, went to Robert. The money I'd worked so hard to save, stayed late at the office for, taken on extra projects for, was now being split with the man who'd betrayed me in every possible way. After the divorce was finalized, Robert moved out immediately. I couldn't stay in that apartment either, too many memories, too much pain. My mother welcomed me home with open arms, just as she had when I was a scared teenager after my first breakup. 2 months after the divorce, I finally had my surgery. The procedure went exactly as the doctors had hoped. They successfully removed the tumor, and my recovery began immediately. Each day, I felt a little stronger, a little more like my old self. During my recovery, I stayed with my mother. She was my rock, just as she'd always been, but I started noticing she seemed more tired than usual. One evening, as we sat in her cozy living room drinking tea, she took my hand. "Ashley, sweetheart, I need to tell you something," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "I've made a decision about my future. I found a wonderful nursing home, Sunset Gardens. It's peaceful, has excellent care, and I've already paid for my stay there." She squeezed my hand. "I want to spend my remaining years somewhere I won't be a burden." "Mom, you're not a burden." "Let me finish," she interrupted with a smile. "I've thought this through. The house will be yours, along with my savings, about $300,000. You deserve a fresh start after everything you've been through." I tried to argue, but Mom had that determined look I knew so well. A week later, I helped her move into Sunset Gardens. The place was beautiful, with gardens and activities, and Mom seemed genuinely excited about this new chapter in her life. After getting her settled, I returned to what was now my house. It felt strange being there alone, but also peaceful. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe freely. Life has a funny way of serving up moments of perfect timing. About a month after Mom's move, I was sitting in my favorite cafe, enjoying a quiet lunch break, when I heard a familiar voice. "Ashley, is that really you?" I looked up to see Robert's mother, Margaret, standing by my table, her face pale as if she'd seen a ghost. "Hello, Margaret," I said, gesturing for her to sit. "I can't believe it," she stammered. "Robert told us you were terminally ill," he said. She trailed off, looking embarrassed. I couldn't help but laugh. "He told you I was dying?" "Well, as you can see, I'm very much alive. Still working at Richardson Financial, actually. And Mom just left me her house. I'm planning to sell it and buy an apartment closer to work." Margaret's face went through a series of emotions before settling on something between shame and satisfaction. "You know," she said, leaning forward, "Robert's living with me now." That woman he left you for, Sarah, she took every penny he got from the divorce and then left him. He's got nothing now. I took a slow sip of my coffee, hiding my smile behind the cup. I didn't need to say anything. Margaret's tone told me she was as disgusted with her son's behavior as I was. He made his bed, she added, shaking her head. Now he has to lie in it. As I watched Margaret leave the cafe, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. I hadn't wished ill on Robert. I'd been too busy focusing on my own recovery to think much about him at all. But knowing that karma had dealt him such a perfect hand of justice? Well, I'd be lying if I said it didn't feel good. I was sorting through some old photos in my mother's living room when I heard aggressive pounding on the front door. Before I could even get up, the door burst open, and there stood Robert, his face red with anger and something else, desperation. "You lied to me," he shouted, storming into the house like he still had a right to be there. "My mother told me everything. You're completely fine." I stood up slowly, keeping the coffee table between us. "Get out of my house, Robert." "Your house?" He laughed bitterly. "The house your mother conveniently left you after our divorce? Along with all that money?" He ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I once found endearing but now saw as theatrical. "Ashley, baby, I made a mistake. I was scared and stupid. I still love you. We can start over." "Love me?" I felt a cold anger rising in my chest. "You're a traitor, Robert. You abandoned me when I was sick. You cheated on me. I want nothing to do with you. Why didn't you tell me you were getting better?" he demanded. "Why didn't you tell me about your mother's plans to leave you all this?" His voice cracked with what he probably thought was emotion, but I recognized as greed. "You want to know why?" I stepped closer to him. "The day I found out my tumor was benign, the day I rushed home to tell you the good news, was the same day I heard you on the phone with your mistress, talking about what a burden I was." He had the decency to flinch at that, but recovered quickly. "That's not fair, Ashley. You deliberately hid your mother's inheritance from me during the divorce. Half of all this belongs to me by law." "No, it doesn't," I said firmly. "Mom left me this inheritance after our divorce was final. You have no claim to it." "Bullshit." He was shouting now, his face getting redder. "You knew this was coming. You and your mother planned this. You hid assets during our divorce proceedings. That's illegal. I'll sue you, Ashley. I'll take you to court and prove that you deliberately concealed future assets during our divorce. You'll have to give me half of everything." I stood in my mother's living room, watching Robert's tirade with a calmness that seemed to infuriate him even more. When he finally paused for breath, I walked to my desk, pulled out my phone, and pulled up the photos I'd saved months ago. "Before you continue threatening me," I said quietly, "I think you should see something." I held up my phone, showing him the screenshots of his conversations with Amanda Wilson, his boss's wife. The color drained from his face. "You remember Amanda, don't you? Your boss John's wife?" I scrolled through the messages slowly, letting him see every damning detail. I wonder what John would think about these messages. About the photos. About all those lunch breaks you spent with his wife while claiming to work overtime. "You wouldn't," he whispered, but his voice had lost all its previous bravado. "I'm trying to recover from a serious illness, Robert. I don't need this stress. I don't need your threats. I don't need you bursting into my house making demands." I locked my phone and set it down. "Leave me alone, or John gets copies of everything. Your choice." He stood there, mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Finally, he backed toward the door. "You've changed," he said accusingly. "No, Robert. I just stopped being afraid." After he left, I sat down and cried, not from sadness or fear, but from relief. It was truly over. The next few months were transformative. I sold my mother's house for an excellent price, thanks to the hot real estate market. With that money and the inheritance, I bought a beautiful apartment in a luxury building just 3 blocks from my office. The walk to work became my daily therapy, helping me rebuild my strength step by step. The illness had taken its toll on my body. I'd lost nearly 20 pounds during the worst of it. But slowly, I began to recover. I started taking yoga classes in my building's fitness center, gradually rebuilding my strength and flexibility. My appetite returned, and with it, my energy. My boss proved to be more understanding than I could have hoped for. "Take all the time you need," she told me during my first week back. "We're just glad to have you back with us." She arranged for me to work flexible hours, allowing me to attend my follow-up appointments and therapy sessions without stress. Sometimes, on my morning walks to work, I'd catch my reflection in the sleek glass buildings and barely recognize myself. Not because of the weight loss or the small scar hidden beneath my hair, but because of the confidence in my stride, the straightness of my spine, the lift of my chin. I was no longer the woman who had been afraid of being alone, of being sick, of being unloved. Through mutual acquaintances, I occasionally heard bits of news about Robert. He was still living with his mother, having blown through his divorce settlement with Sarah. Apparently, he'd had to leave his job at TradeWorks, though whether he quit or was fired, I never asked. It didn't matter anymore. My mother thrived at Sunset Gardens, making new friends and taking up watercolor painting. I visited her every Sunday, and we'd sit in the garden, drinking tea and talking about everything and nothing. She never said "I told you so" about Robert, never reminded me that she'd had doubts about him from the start. Instead, she would smile at me with pride and say, "You're blooming, sweetheart." She was right. Like the potted orchid on my new apartment's windowsill, a housewarming gift from my team at work, I was blooming. The tumor, the betrayal, the divorce, they hadn't destroyed me. They had forced me to grow stronger roots.